Damn it. Where the hell is it? Damn it. My fingers raked through the chaos on my desk. Piles of invoices, old sketches, a cold coffee mug stained brown. Nothing. I shoved the keyboard aside, the clatter echoing in the small apartment. The client needed the final render by 9 a.m. The file was on that flash drive. That tiny, black, ridiculously easy-to-lose flash drive. I stood up, pacing the worn patch of carpet in my living room. One room, really. The desk, the couch, the kitchenette, all one big box. My kingdom of solitude. Think, Ian, think. The coffee shop yesterday. I had it there. I remember unplugging it from my laptop. Did I put it in my pocket? I frantically patted down my jeans. Nothing. My jacket, hanging off the back of a chair. I plunged my hands into the pockets. Lint, a crumpled receipt, no drive. Son of a bitch. I kicked at a stack of magazines. They slid across the floor. Of course. This would happen on the night before the Henderson project was due. Henderson, the human ulcer. The man who emailed in all caps. My eyes scanned the room again, a wasteland of my own making. Maybe it fell on the floor. I got on my hands and knees, the rough carpet scratching my palms. I peered under the desk, into the dust bunnies and tangled cables. Nothing. Under the couch cushions? Just crumbs and a lost pen. This is what you get for being a slob. This is what you get for living alone. No one to ask, hey, have you seen? No one to blame but yourself. I gave up. I threw myself onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The faint hum of the building was the only sound. I could go back to the coffee shop first thing in the morning. Hope some honest soul turned it in. Hope the cleaning crew hadn't just swept it into the trash. That was the only play. It had to be. Yeah. I'd just have to wake up early. What a pain in the ass. The thought of it was exhausting. I decided to make another pot of coffee. Might as well pull an all-nighter and rebuild the file from an earlier save. It would be a nightmare, but at least it was something I could control. I slouched into the kitchen area, a small alcove with a counter and a few cabinets. I pulled a filter from the box, my movements slow and defeated. I reached for the coffee tin on the counter, and then I saw it. I stopped. My hand froze in midair. There, on top of the refrigerator, was the flash drive. It wasn't tossed there. It wasn't wedged against the wall or half hidden behind the cereal box I kept up there. It was sitting perfectly in the center, a small black rectangle on a vast white plane. Wait, how did it get there? I never, ever put things on top of the fridge. It was too high, a pain to reach. It was a dead zone. I stared at it, my brain scrambled for an explanation. Did I come home yesterday, totally zoned out, and put it there? A moment of profound, unprecedented stupidity? It didn't feel right. I couldn't picture it. A hollow space bloomed in my chest where the memory should have been. I reached up on my toes and plucked it off the smooth, cold surface. It felt normal, just a piece of plastic and metal. I stood there in the middle of my kitchen, the flash drive in my palm, and listened. The hum of the fridge. The distant siren of a city that never slept. The soft tick of my own watch. The apartment was quiet. Utterly, completely quiet. I shook my head, a small, dismissive gesture. Brain fart. Must have been a brain fart. I was overworked. Underslept. That's all. I walked back to my desk, relief washing over the unease. Crisis averted. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The little icon popped up on the screen. All the files were there. I clicked open the Henderson render, ready to get to work. I put on some lo-fi music, my usual work soundtrack. Time to focus. And then I heard it. Tap. It was quiet. So quiet I thought it was part of the music. A weird snare drum. Tap. I paused the track. The room fell silent again, except for the low hum of my computer's fan. Tap. 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 It was rhythmic. Steady. And it was coming from the wall. The wall, right behind my monitor. It wasn't loud. It was a soft, insistent little sound. Like a fingernail tapping on drywall. My first thought, pipes. It had to be the building's plumbing. An air bubble caught somewhere. Tap, tap, tap. But it was too even, too deliberate. Pipes groaned and shuddered. They didn't keep a beat. Okay. Neighbors. The apartment next door. But the wall behind my desk was an exterior wall. There was nothing on the other side but 20 stories of air and the building across the street. The unease from the kitchen came rushing back, colder this time. I stood up and walked over to the wall. It was just a plain white wall. I'd hung a single framed print on it, but that was it. It looked solid, normal. Tap, tap, tap. It was definitely coming from inside. Somewhere in the space between my apartment and the outer brickwork. A mouse? A rat? The thought was disgusting, but better than the alternative that was starting to form in the back of my mind. But a rat wouldn't tap so methodically. They scratch, they scurry. This was a pattern. I picked up my phone. I had the building manager's number on speed dial for emergencies. This felt close to an emergency. Or maybe I was just being crazy. I hesitated. What would I even say? Hi, yeah, my wall is tapping? I'd sound like a nutcase. Tap, tap, tap. It was a little faster now, a little harder. I hit the call button. It rang. Once. Twice. The sound of the ringing filled my apartment, a weird counter-rhythm to the tapping. 3 times. 4. On the 5th ring, it went to voicemail. You've reached the building manager's office. Our hours are 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If this is an emergency, please. I hung up. Of course. It was after 10 page M. No one was there. I was alone. I was completely, utterly alone with the sound. A strange feeling washed over me. Not just fear. It was a feeling of being watched, of being targeted. The flash drive on the fridge. The tapping now. It felt connected. It felt like a message. What the hell was happening? This PM. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild beat that was all my own. The logical part of my brain was in a fistfight with the primal part. It's an animal. It's the building settling. It's anything but what you think it is. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. That wasn't an animal. I approached the wall again, moving slowly, like I was trying not to spook a stray dog. I placed my hand flat against the drywall. It was cool to the touch. I couldn't feel any vibration. The tapping was purely auditory, a phantom sound coming from within. Tap, 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 tap. It was mocking me. I had to know. I had to be sure. My breath hitched in my throat. I leaned in, my cheek almost grazing the painted surface. I turned my head, pressing my ear firmly against the wall. Silence. Instant. Total silence. The tapping stopped the very second my ear made contact. I didn't move. I held my breath, listening. There was nothing. The sound was gone. Not faded out, not paused. It was just switched off. My own blood pounded in my ears, a hot, rushing sound. I could feel a single drop of sweat trace a path down my temple. I stayed there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. 10 seconds. 30. A full minute. Nothing. The silence was 100 times worse than the noise. The noise was a question. The silence was an answer. It knew. Whatever was in my wall, it knew I was listening. It had been waiting for me to get close. It was a game. A sick game of hide-and-seek. I pulled my head away from the wall, a shaky, hysterical laugh bubbling in my chest. I was losing my mind. That was it. Stress. Deadlines. I was having some kind of auditory hallucination. I scrubbed my hands over my face, the laugh dying in my throat. I needed a drink. I needed to get out of here. My phone buzzed on the desk. The sudden vibration made me jump, a choked gasp escaping my lips. My eyes darted to the screen. It lit up. A notification. A text message. From a number I didn't recognize. My hand trembled as I reached for it. My throat was dry. My gaze fell on the 2 words displayed on the lock screen. 2 words that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Found it. A joke. It had to be a joke. Wrong number. Some idiot sending a text to the wrong contact. That's what it was. It couldn't be anything else. My brain, slick with adrenaline, tried to latch onto the logic, to wrap itself around the rational explanation like a man overboard grabbing a piece of driftwood. But the words on the screen were a perfect, chilling echo of the bizarre event with the flash drive. It wasn't random. It felt surgical. Found it. Who found what? For me? The thought was absurd. I deleted the message without another look. My thumb stabbed at the screen, wiping it from existence. I wouldn't reply. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Some little shit, one of Mark's asshole friends from college, probably. Mark was the only one who even knew about the Henderson Project fiasco. I'd called him an hour ago, ranting about my lost drive. He must have put one of his buddies up to it. Yeah, that made sense. It was a stupid, juvenile prank. I shoved the phone to the far side of the desk, screen down. Out of sight, out of mind. The Henderson render was still open on my laptop, the complex wireframe of a new high-rise shimmering on the screen. Focus, Ian. Just focus. They can't get to you if you don't let them. I put my headphones on but didn't play any music. The silence they provided was enough. A buffer against the world. Against the tapping that had, for now, stopped. Against the phone that now felt like a live grenade on my desk. I started to work. My fingers moved over the keyboard, executing commands, adjusting lighting, tweaking textures. The familiar motions were a comfort. This was my space. My work. My control. The building hummed its low, constant lullaby. The city lights cast geometric patterns on my floor. Everything was normal. I was a guy in his apartment, working late. That's all. The text was a prank. The flash drive was a brain fart. The tapping was a rat. I had an answer for everything. An explanation for every little tear in a reality that was starting to feel thin as paper. And then I heard it through the headphones. Not a tapping this time. Music. A faint piano melody. It was old. The notes were clear but carried a weight. A sadness that modern recordings just didn't have. It sounded like it was coming from a worn-out record player in a distant room, full of ghosts and dust. I pulled the headphones off. The music became clearer, louder. It wasn't coming from my laptop. It was coming from the corner of the room, my smart speaker. The little gray cylinder I used to ask for the weather and play my workout playlists. The Lumina. Its soft blue light was pulsing gently in time with the sad, slow notes of the piano. I never listened to this kind of music. Ever. My playlists were full of punk rock and lo-fi hip-hop. Nothing like this mournful, creeping tune. My heart gave a hard, painful kick against my ribs. Okay, Lumina, I said, my voice cutting through the melody. Stop music. The piano stopped instantly. The blue light died. Silence rushed back in, heavy and thick. Okay. I stood up, my desk chair rolling back with a sharp squeal. My eyes were locked on the speaker. Maybe I'd brushed my phone. Maybe the Lumina app had been open, and I'd accidentally hit some weird, curated, depressing, old-timey piano playlist. It was possible. Highly unlikely, but possible. It was the only explanation that didn't involve me completely losing my mind. The prankster. The text message. Maybe they'd figured out my password. Hacked my account to play a weird song. It was a new level of asshole, but it was still in the realm of the explainable. I walked over to the speaker and stared down at it. A simple piece of tech. Plastic and circuits. Harmless. I felt a surge of anger. The feeling of being messed with, of my private space being invaded, made my hands clench into fists. A few minutes passed. I stayed standing, listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge again. The distant traffic. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was a hack. A stupid, childish hack. I'd change all my passwords tomorrow. I went back to my desk, sat down, and tried to find the rhythm of my work again. The Henderson building waited. The piano started again. This time there was no mistaking it. It wasn't faint. It was loud. The melody filled the entire apartment, each note landing like a drop of ice water on my skin. It was the same sad, lonely tune, but now it felt aggressive. It was a demand for attention. "Lumina, stop!" I yelled. My voice cracked. The music continued, just as loud, just as clear. The blue light pulsed, mocking me. "Lumina, stop playing!" I screamed, shoving my chair back so hard it banged against the wall. The piano notes tumbled on, relentless, unbothered by my rage. It wasn't listening. It wasn't a glitch anymore. This was a deliberate act. It was inside my home. Not just tapping in the walls, but in the very network that connected my life. The text. The music. It was all one thing. One presence that was actively, methodically, taking my space apart. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I wasn't just being messed with. I was being held hostage by my own technology. I scrambled over to the corner, my feet tangling in a power strip. I didn't care. My eyes were fixed on the speaker's power cord, a thin black snake running from the wall to the device. I yanked it. The plug came free with a sharp, plastic scrape. The music should have died. The light should have vanished. For 2 seconds, maybe 3, the impossible happened. Devoid of power, cut off from its life source, the speaker kept playing. The piano melody faltered, became tinny and distorted, like a music box winding down. It was a ghost of the sound, a dying whisper that should not have existed. Then, with a final sour note, it went silent. The blue light blinked out. The apartment was dead quiet. I stood there, panting, the useless plug dangling from my hand. I was staring at a piece of dead plastic that had just broken the laws of physics. My mind refused to process it. An after-image of sound. An electrical discharge. It had to be. It had to be. But the fear was cold and solid in my gut. It knew the truth. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hacker. A wave of pure animal terror washed over me. I felt a desperate, violent need to fight back, to do something. My eyes darted around the room, landing on a thick paperback novel on my bookshelf, A History of Urban Planning. Heavy, solid. Without thinking, I grabbed it. The worn cover felt rough against my sweating palm. I turned and hurled it with all my strength at the corner where the speaker sat. It was a wild, desperate act. A scream made of paper and glue. The book missed the speaker. It hit the wall beside it with a loud, hollow thump. And then, silence again. The sound of the impact echoed for a second, and then was gone. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing, loud and harsh in the stillness. I stared at the book lying on the floor, its spine broken. My chest heaved, my hands were shaking. I had just attacked my own apartment. What the hell was I doing? I was falling apart. My gaze drifted from the fallen book. It swept across the room, a frantic search for any other sign, any other threat. My eyes passed over the couch, the kitchen counter, the framed print on the wall. They came to rest on the television. The TV was off. Its screen was a blank, black rectangle. A dark mirror. It reflected the room back at me. The warm, yellow glow of the lamp on my desk. The white of the walls. The dark shape of my own body, standing frozen in the middle of the floor. And something else. Behind me. In the reflection, just over my shoulder, there was another shape. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light from the window. It was a smudge of darkness that didn't belong. A silhouette. It was tall, taller than me. A long, lean shape, defined only by its utter blackness against the pale reflection of the wall. It was perfectly, unnaturally still. Not breathing, not moving a muscle. It was just there. Standing right behind me, my blood turned to ice, my breath caught in my lungs, a solid block of terror. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only stare at the reflection in the dark screen, at my own horrified face, and at the long, silent shadow of the thing that was in the room with me. My heart slammed against my ribs, a single, violent jolt. I spun around, my body twisting so fast my vision blurred at the edges. Nothing. The room was empty. The couch, the desk, the small kitchen counter, the space between the bookshelf and the wall, all of it was exactly as it should be, exactly as it was seconds ago. There was no one there. Absolutely no one. My brain screamed it at me. Nobody is here? A trick of the light. It had to be. The strange, shifting glow from the city outside filtered through my window, hitting the dark screen of the TV at a weird angle. It created a shape. A pareidolia of terror. That's what it was. My mind, overloaded and frayed, was playing tricks on me. That long, dark shape was just a lie my eyes told my brain. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It came out as a ragged, shaky gasp. I dragged a hand down my face. My skin was clammy. Get a grip, Ian? Jesus. I was attacking my own furniture. I was seeing things in reflections. The stress of the Henderson project, the lost flash drive, the goddamn prankster with my phone number. It was all piling up, short-circuiting my reason. I needed sleep. I needed to get my eyes checked. Maybe the wiring in this old building was faulty, causing the tech to glitch. That explained the speaker. It didn't explain the text message. It damn sure didn't explain the impossible way the music had lingered after I pulled the plug. But I pushed that thought down. I buried it, one problem at a time. The immediate problem was the phantom in the television, and since there was no phantom, there was no problem. Logic. I clung to it like a life raft. My throat was sandpaper. I needed water, something cold to shock my system back to normal. I walked toward the kitchen, my steps feeling heavy, deliberate. I kept my eyes fixed forward, refusing to glance back at the black, silent screen of the TV. Don't give it power. Don't look. The kitchen was just a small alcove off the main room. I reached for the refrigerator handle. The cool, smooth metal under my fingertips was a small, solid anchor to reality. See? Real, solid, normal. I pulled the door open. The familiar, low hum washed over me, and the soft white lights spilled out, casting long shadows behind the milk and the leftovers. I reached for the water filter pitcher, and I froze. My hand stopped, hovering in midair. It was sitting on top of the milk carton, propped up, placed with a deliberate, almost gentle care. A photograph. It was an old print, the colors faded to a nostalgic, sickly yellow-green. The corners were soft, rounded with age. It showed a little boy, no older than 5, sitting on the cracked concrete steps of a porch I hadn't seen in 20 years. His face was a mess of tears and dirt. In his small, clenched fist was a broken red toy car. His other hand was balled up, as if ready to strike out at the world. The little boy was me. My blood went cold. Not a slow chill, but an instant, chemical freeze. My mind, which had been so desperately scrabbling for logical explanations, went completely silent. It had nothing. No theory. No excuse. This photograph did not belong here. It did not exist in this apartment. It did not exist in this city. This photograph belonged to my mother. It was buried deep inside a thick faux leather photo album in a dusty closet in her house, 3 states away. I hadn't seen it in a decade. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that the original was still right there, pressed between a picture of my first bike and a school photo where I was missing 2 front teeth. So how could this be here? How could it be standing in my fridge, cooled to the same temperature as my milk, waiting for me? Kara, this wasn't a hack. This wasn't a prank. This was a violation on a level one couldn't comprehend. It was a message. A piece of my most private past, weaponized and placed in my most private space. My fingers, trembling, reached out and touched the edge of the photo. The cool, glossy paper felt real, sickeningly real. The instant my skin made contact, the world broke. Flicker. The main light overhead died, then flared back to life. Flicker, flicker. Then it went insane. A strobe-like, frantic blinking that plunged the room into a chaotic dance of light and shadow. My pupils dilated and contracted with each pulse, the effect dizzying and nauseating. With the first flicker came the sound. It was back. Not the tapping, not the scraping. Banging, hard, solid, violent thuds from inside the wall next to the kitchen. It sounded like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the studs. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact was perfectly, horribly synchronized with the flickering of the light. The entire apartment had become one single, monstrous, pulsing heartbeat. Thump, flicker. Thump, flicker. Thump, flicker. My mind wasn't thinking in words anymore. It was just a blast of pure, white-hot instinct. One single command that overrode everything else. E-A-T. I dropped the photograph. It fluttered to the kitchen floor. I didn't watch it fall. I had already turned, stumbling away from the pulsing nightmare of the kitchen, and launched myself toward the front door. It was 10 feet away, the longest 10 feet of my life. My feet tangled, I nearly fell, but my momentum carried me forward. My only thought was the hallway, the stairs, the street. Away from here. My hand closed around the doorknob. Pain. A searing, white-hot agony shot up my arm. I cried out, a sharp, ragged sound, and yanked my hand back as if I'd touched a live stove. The metal of the knob wasn't just warm. It was scalding. Impossibly hot. I stared at my palm, already turning an angry, blotchy red. A burn. The door, my one and only exit, had become a weapon. The trap had sprung. I was locked in. Panic turned to something else, a new feeling, hot and acidic, bubbling up from my gut. Rage. A cornered, desperate rage. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was a prisoner. I was being played with, toyed with. I spun back from the door, my eyes scanning the room, wide and wild. I wouldn't just stand here and be terrorized. I wouldn't. I needed something. Something to fight with. My gaze fell on the stove, on the heavy, black, cast-iron skillet I'd used to make eggs this morning. It was solid. It was heavy. It was real. I lunged for it, grabbing the handle. The weight of it in my hand was a small, cold comfort. It was something to hold, something to swing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a weapon. I turned to face the wall where the banging was the loudest. The insane flickering of the lights threw my shadow across the room. A huge, misshapen giant wielding a black circle of iron. The thump flicker continued. A relentless drumbeat counting down to my own insanity. A scream tore itself from my throat. It was just noise at first, a raw, animal sound of pure fear and fury. Then words followed, shouted into the pulsing chaos. WHO! Are you? The pan felt heavy in my grip. What do you want? Show yourself. My voice was a raw shred. Come on, right here. Come on. I raised the skillet, ready to bring it smashing into the drywall to meet whatever was in there with my own brand of violence. And then everything stopped. The banging ceased. The light stopped flickering, staying on, casting the room in a steady, normal glow. The silence that fell was absolute, a vacuum. It was more terrifying than the noise had been. I stood there, panting, the heavy pan still held high, my heart hammering against my bones. I strained my ears, listening. The answer came. It started as a giggle. A small, high-pitched sound, like a child's. It seemed to come from the corner, from the powerless smart speaker. Then another sound joined it. A low, dry chuckle from behind me, near the TV. Then another, a wheezing, breathy laugh from the ceiling directly above my head. And then a chorus of them erupted from the wall I was facing. Giggles, chuckles, deep rattling laughter, and high, thin snickers. It came from every direction at once. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The sounds layered over each other, a discordant symphony of mockery. The entire apartment was laughing at me. It wasn't human laughter. It was too dry, too thin, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It was laughing at my pathetic defiance. It was laughing at my skillet. It was laughing at my terror. My arm went slack. The pan suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The sound seeped into my bones, a chorus of wrongness that vibrated through my very soul. Then, as one, the laughter cut off. Silence rushed back in, now thick with the memory of that sound. It was a conscious silence, a waiting silence. I was still standing in the middle of the room, skillet in hand, my body trembling. I was an actor on a stage, and the audience was done with me for the moment. Ting! The sound was so small, so mundane, that it tore through the suffocating quiet like a gunshot. My phone. On the desk. A notification. Every cell in my body screamed at me not to look, to throw the phone against the wall, to smash it, to run back to the burning doorknob and try again. But I couldn't. I had to know. The need to understand was as powerful as the fear. I lowered the skillet, placing it carefully on the floor as if the slightest noise might start the laughter again. My legs were stiff, robotic, as I walked the few steps to my desk. My phone screen was lit up. An email. I picked it up. My thumb was slick with sweat. The notification was on the lock screen. I didn't need to open it to see the details. From no_reply@unknown.net. Subject: Hello, new neighbor. A wave of dizziness washed over me. My thumb hovered over the screen, shaking. I unlocked the phone. The mail app opened. The email was there. No text in the body. Just a single image file, still loading. A little spinning circle. The circle disappeared. The image snapped into view. It was a photograph. It was me, asleep, in my bed. My mouth was slightly open, one arm thrown up over the pillow. The blue comforter was rumpled around my body. I stared, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was just a picture of me sleeping. But it was the angle. The angle was what made my stomach clench and my throat close up. The picture was taken from directly above me, as if the photographer had been floating on the ceiling. 10 feet up. Looking straight down, inside my locked apartment. Inside my bedroom. In the bottom right corner of the image, in small, white digital text, was the timestamp. 3:17 a.m. Last night. Sleep was not an option. Sleep was a death sentence. I was on the couch, the cold, heavy cast-iron skillet resting on my lap. My knuckles were white where I gripped the handle. My body was coiled into a tight knot of muscle and wire, a human spring ready to snap. The apartment was still, cast in the steady, normal glow of the single overhead light. The silence was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on me. My mind, a frantic rat in a maze, scrambled for a wall to cling to. The photo. The email. The timestamp. 3:17 a.m. A time. A concrete point in reality. A person had to be there to take a picture. A person had to send an email. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon laughing in the walls. It was a person. A stalker. That was the word my brain seized on. Stalker. A sick, tech-savvy bastard who had hacked my life, who had found a way to clone my key, who had stood over my bed while I slept. The thought was sickening, a deep violation that made my skin crawl, but it was better than the alternative. It was knowable. It was human. Humans could be fought. Humans could bleed. But the laughter, the burning doorknob, the way the light had pulsed with the thuds from the wall. No. Stop. One enemy, one explanation. It had to be a person. A flesh-and-blood monster playing God with speakers and smart devices. A hyper-advanced prank designed to break me. I repeated it like a mantra. It's a person. It's a person. It's just a person. I was a victim of a very specific, very cruel crime. I wasn't going insane. Minutes bled into an hour. I didn't move. My gaze darted around the room, cataloging every shadow, every corner, the TV, the bookshelf, the damn smart speaker, now sitting inert and silent on the corner table. My rational explanation felt flimsy, a paper shield against a hurricane. The fear was too deep. Too primal. It wasn't just the fear of an intruder. It was the fear of the wrongness of it all. Logic was failing. Maybe I needed something else. My fingers, sticky with sweat, fumbled for my phone. The screen felt slick. I kept the skillet balanced on my knees. My thumbs shook as I typed into the search bar, the words feeling utterly insane. How to get rid of an evil presence. Protect a home from spirits. Salt circle protection. The results were a deluge of forums, New Age blogs, and paranormal folklore sites. It was ridiculous. It was the frantic scrabbling of a mind at the end of its rope. But I saw it again and again. Salt. A line of salt. An ancient barrier against evil. Stupid. A child's defense against a monster under the bed. But what else did I have? Deco de blasmeo. I pushed myself off the couch, the skillet held out in front of me like a shield. My legs were stiff. Each step toward the kitchen was a negotiation with my own terror. The memory of the laughter, of the pulsing light, was stored in the very atoms of that space. I rounded the counter. The photo I'd dropped was still on the floor, face down. I didn't look at it. My eyes scanned the small shelf above the stove. Salt? Pepper? Paprika? And there it was. A standard cylindrical cardboard shaker of iodized salt. A blue circle on a white background. The most normal thing in the world. My hands were trembling so badly it took me 2 attempts to get a grip on it. It felt real. Solid. I held it in my left hand, the skillet heavy in my right. A shaman from hell, ready to do battle with cheap spices and cookware. I twisted the plastic lid with the little holes. It wouldn't budge. It was stuck fast. I gritted my teeth, put the skillet down on the counter with a soft clank, and used both hands. The plastic groaned and then popped open. I tilted the shaker over my palm, ready to pour a protective mound. It wasn't salt. It wasn't white. It wasn't crystalline. A thick, dark clump fell into my hand. It was soft, oily, a tangled nest of long black hair. It was damp to the touch, and a faint, sweet, cloying smell, like rotten flowers, rose from it. My stomach revolted. A gag reflex tore at my throat. I stared at the disgusting clump in my palm, at the way the individual strands clung to my skin. This wasn't my hair. It wasn't a woman's hair, I knew. It was just wrong. Another impossible object in an impossible place. A personal, defiling message. With a choked cry of disgust, I flung the shaker away from me. It hit the wall with a hollow thud and clattered to the floor, spilling more of the greasy black hair onto the linoleum. I scrambled to the sink, turning on the tap, scrubbing my hand under the cold water, scrubbing until my skin was raw. Bleep bloop. The sound, cheerful and electronic, cut through the rush of the water. I froze, my heart seizing. It came from the main room. My laptop. I turned off the tap. The sudden silence was deafening. Cautiously, I peered around the edge of the kitchen counter. The lid of my laptop, which I had left closed on my desk, was now open. The screen was shining a bright, cold light into the room. It had turned itself on. I crept forward, one slow step at a time, skillet back in my hand. My eyes were fixed on the screen. It wasn't my desktop. It was a video feed, a familiar one. The low-res, black-and-white view of the security camera in the hallway outside my apartment. I could see the scuffed beige walls, the flickering fluorescent light, the door to 4B across the hall. The feed was live. The timestamp in the corner updated with each passing second. As I watched, a door opened down the hall. Mr. Henderson from 4F emerged, carrying a white plastic bag full of trash. He was an old man, always wore the same gray cardigan. He walked with a slight shuffle, his slippers scuffing the floor. A perfectly normal sight, a resident taking out his trash late at night. For a split second, a wave of relief washed over me. See? Normal. He shuffled past the door of 4B. Then 4C. He was approaching my door, just out of frame to the left. As his form passed directly in front of the camera, a foot from my own front door, he stopped. He didn't turn his body, just his head. It swiveled around, a smooth, unnatural rotation, 180 degrees. His chin came to rest over his spine, his face now staring directly, perfectly into the camera lens. The skin was pulled tight over his skull, his eyes were wide, black, and empty, and his mouth was stretched into a vast, silent, screaming grin that split his face from ear to ear. It wasn't Mr. Henderson's face. It was a mask of terror stretched over his features. He stared into the camera, into my laptop, into me. For 1 second. 2. Then, just as smoothly, his head rotated back to its normal position. He gave a little sigh, as if he'd just stretched a stiff muscle, and resumed his shuffling walk down the hallway, disappearing off-screen toward the garbage chute, as if nothing had happened. The laptop screen was a window into a world that no longer made sense. The threat wasn't just in my apartment. It was wearing my neighbors' faces. It was walking the halls. There was nowhere to run. The trap wasn't the room. The trap was the whole building. Scrape. A sound from the front door. Loud. Sharp. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of something hard and sharp being dragged across the wood. SCRRRRAAAAAAPE. RIIP. It was claws. It sounded exactly like an animal trying to claw its way in. Splinters of wood popping. The vicious, frantic sound of something desperate to get through. My breath hitched. All thought evaporated, replaced by pure lizard brain instinct. Hide? I scrambled backwards, my feet tangling, and dropped behind the couch. I pressed myself flat against the floor, the rough fabric of the sofa digging into my cheek. I clamped my hand over my mouth, stifling the scream building in my chest. The skillet lay useless beside me. What good was a pan against that? Scrape, scratch, gouge. The sound was right there, just feet away. A relentless, violent assault on my only exit. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still see it in my mind. Mr. Henderson's grinning, upside-down face clawing at my door. I had to look. I had to know. I risked a glance, peering through the narrow gap between the bottom of the couch and the floor. I could see the front door, the sliver of light underneath it. A shadow fell across the light. Then another. They were long and thin. They were moving. They were fingers. Long, pale, skeletal fingers, wriggling and probing their way through the crack under the door. They twitched and flexed, the nails black and ragged, scratching against the hardwood floor inside my apartment. They were trying to get a purchase, to pull, to widen the gap. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of pure terror. I was going to die. Here, on the floor, hiding behind my cheap sofa. And then it stopped. The scratching ceased. The fingers retracted, disappearing back under the door. A profound, terrifying silence fell once more. A waiting silence. Click. The sound was small, metallic, precise. It was the sound of the deadbolt unlocking from the outside. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I watched, paralyzed, as the doorknob turned slowly. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into the silent, empty hallway. A dark, rectangular void. No one was there. Nothing came in. For a long, drawn-out moment, there was only the open doorway. Then, something small and black was tossed inside. It skittered across the wood floor with a plastic-on-wood clatter, spinning and sliding until it came to a stop in the middle of the room. Right in my line of sight. It was a phone. The screen lit up. It was displaying a video. A live video. I could see the back of my own couch. The pattern on the fabric. I could see the top of a bookshelf against the far wall. The angle was high, looking down, as if filmed from the corner of the ceiling. As I stared, frozen in horror, a shape moved into the frame from the bottom of the screen. A shock of brown hair. The top of a head. My head. The video was of me. Hiding. Right now. I was watching myself on a live feed, broadcast from a camera somewhere inside my own sealed apartment. Delivered by a thing that walked in my neighbor's skin and unlocked my door from the outside. The camera on the phone's screen zoomed in, a smooth, silent motion, until the image filled the entire display. It was my own face. Staring out from behind the couch, my eyes wide, my mouth a perfect, silent O of terror. My body moved before my brain did. Raw instinct, an animal surge of adrenaline that bypassed all thought. I was on my feet, stumbling over the skillet, scrambling for the door that thing had just opened. The phone on the floor, with its live feed of my own terrified face, was a black hole pulling all reason into it. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. Out. Get out. The hallway was empty, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the dark rectangle of my open doorway. I didn't slow down. I ran. My bare feet slapped against the worn linoleum. I didn't care about shoes or my keys or my wallet. I just ran. Down the stairs, taking them two at a time, my body clumsy and weak. I burst out the main doors into the cool night air. The street was quiet. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping across me, and for a second I was just a crazy guy in a t-shirt and sweat standing on a sidewalk. I drove. I don't remember getting in my car. I just remember the engine being on and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I ended up at a motel off the highway, a place with a buzzing neon sign and a smell of bleach and desperation. I paid in cash, whatever crumpled bills I had in my center console. I didn't even look the clerk in the eye. The room was a box, brown carpet, a bed with a questionable comforter, a bolted-down TV. I locked the deadbolt. I jammed the chain lock. I shoved the cheap desk chair under the knob. Then I collapsed onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. The live feed from the phone played on a loop in my head. The camera angle from above. My own hair. My own face. The absolute violation. Sleep was not a thing that happened. Dawn came as a dirty gray light through the thin curtains. With it came something else. Not hope, not courage, just cold, hard rage. The terror was still there, a frozen chunk of ice in my gut, but the rage was a fire around it. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some demon from a cheap movie. The video feed proved that. The fingers under the door proved that. It was a person. A sick, twisted person who had gotten inside my apartment, inside my phone, inside my head. And I was going to catch him. I wasn't going to be a victim hiding in a roach motel. I was going to turn the tables. I was going to set a trap of my own. I showered in water that was barely lukewarm. I got dressed. I drove to a 24-hour superstore. The bright lights and piped-in music felt like they were from another planet. I walked past families buying groceries, kids whining for toys. I was on another frequency, a ghost in their normal world. In the electronics section, I found what I was looking for, a box of wireless security cameras. Tiny little things, no bigger than a golf ball. Discreet home monitoring, the package promised. I bought the biggest kit they had, 6 cameras, night vision, motion-activated recording, live feed to my laptop or phone. I was going to wire my apartment. I was going to turn my prison into a fishbowl. Every inch would be monitored. When he came back, and I knew he would, I would see him. I would have proof. I would have his face. Returning to my apartment building was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel. The front doors looked like the entrance to a tomb. I took the elevator. Every sound it made, the whine of the cables, the ding of arrival, made my muscles tighten. The walk down the hall to 4D was a nightmare. I looked at the door to 4F, Mr. Henderson's door. Was he in there, sleeping, or was that thing wearing his skin again? Mayhem. My door was closed, locked, as if nothing had happened. I used my key. The lock turned. The apartment was exactly as I had left it in my panicked flight. The skillet lay on the floor. The phone was dark, screen down, a few feet from the couch. I kicked it under the sofa. I didn't want to see it. The rest of the day was a blur of focused activity. A mission. I unboxed the cameras. I read the instructions. I placed the first one on the high bookshelf in the living room, angled to cover the front door and the couch. The second one went in the corner of the kitchen, aimed at the main living space. The third I put on my dresser in the bedroom, with a clear view of the bed and the window. Another in the short hallway. One aimed directly at the space under the front door. The last one, the 6th camera, I reserved for the source of it all. I placed it on the floor, hidden behind a floor lamp, pointing directly at the wall. The wall where the drumming had come from. The wall where the burning doorknob had been. I synced them all to my laptop. 6 little windows popped up on my screen, a grid of black and white feeds showing my empty, silent apartment. My control panel. I felt a surge of power. The fear was still there, but now it had an equal. I was watching back. I had the upper hand. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just sit and wait for it to happen. That was its game. I had to be smarter. I grabbed my laptop, my keys, and walked out, locking the door firmly behind me. I went to a cheap coffee shop across the street, a place with a clear view of my building's entrance. I found a booth in the back, ordered a coffee I wouldn't drink, and opened my laptop. The 6 feeds stared back at me. My empty apartment. Silent. Still. A perfect, motionless grid. I watched. An hour passed. Nothing. The sun began to set, and the cameras automatically switched to night vision, casting the rooms in a grainy, ethereal glow. Nothing moved. 2 hours. My coffee was cold. My eyes burned from staring at the screen. Doubt began to creep in. A cold, slithering thing. What if I was wrong? What if the gas leak theory wasn't so crazy? Toxic mold? A slow carbon monoxide leak? That would explain the paranoia. The phantom sounds. What if he wasn't coming back? What if last night's horror show was a one-time thing? My elaborate camera setup suddenly seemed foolish, the desperate act of a man losing his mind. I was hunting a ghost that might only exist in my own head. I scrubbed a hand over my face. I was exhausted. Jumped up on caffeine and raw nerves. Maybe I should just go home. Go to bed. And then it happened. All 6 windows on my screen flickered at once. Just for a second. A flash of static. A horizontal roll. Then they all went black. No signal. Each one read in stark white letters. My heart stopped. No, 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 no. They couldn't all fail at once. A battery dying, maybe one. A loose connection. But all 6? Simultaneously? That wasn't a malfunction. That was deliberate. Someone had cut the power. Or jammed the signal. He knew. He knew about the cameras. My phone vibrated against the table. The sound was so loud in the quiet cafe it made me jump. My hands trembled as I picked it up. A series of notifications. From an unknown number. Text messages. Each one contained a video file. My blood ran cold. I pressed play on the first one. It was a video from my own camera. The one on the bookshelf. The feed was live, shaky, as if held in someone's hand. A pale, long-fingered hand reached out and disconnected the tiny power cord. The feed cut to black. My breath hitched. Another notification. I clicked the second video. This one was from the kitchen camera. A figure stood in the middle of my living room, his back to the camera. He was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. He turned slowly. His face was obscured by shadow, a featureless blank. He raised a hand and gave a small, casual wave directly at the camera. Then the feed died. My throat was closing up. He was in there. Right now. He was in my apartment, playing with my traps. The third video, this one from the camera pointed at the problem wall. The feed was looking up at the shadowy figure as he picked a camera up. He held it for a moment, then walked over to the bookshelf and placed it where the first camera had been. He adjusted the angle with a delicate touch, making sure it had a perfect view of the entire room again. He was rearranging my setup. I was going to be sick. I tapped the fourth video, the final one. It was the feed from the bookshelf camera, the one he had just repositioned. The view was stable now. It showed my living room, the couch, the kitchen entrance, the wall. The room was completely empty. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. He had disabled my system, taunted me, and then disappeared, all within seconds. The trap had been turned against me. He wasn't just an intruder. He was a ghost who could manipulate technology. But the video kept playing. It wasn't over. The camera, in its new position, held on the empty room. For a long, silent moment, nothing happened. I was about to shut it off when I saw it. The figure. He hadn't vanished. He was standing by the far wall. The problem wall. He just stood there, perfectly still, his back to the camera. I watched, my heart hammering a brutal rhythm against my ribs, waiting for him to move, to turn, to do something. He didn't turn. He just walked forward. He walked towards the solid plaster and wood wall. He didn't slow down. He didn't brace for impact. He just walked. His foot touched the wall and went through it. Not into it, not breaking it. Through it. The plaster rippled like water for a fraction of a second, and then his leg was gone. He took another step. His torso merged with the wall, his form distorting for a moment, like a bad TV signal. And then he was gone. He had walked straight through the wall and disappeared inside it. The video ended. The empty room filled my phone screen. My phone slipped from my fingers. It hit the table with a clatter, spun, fell to the floor. I didn't hear it land. The world had gone silent. My mind, which had been racing, screeching, screaming for 2 days, just stopped. It wasn't a stalker in the walls. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't gas poisoning. It was something that walked through them. I didn't move from the booth for a long time. The world outside the coffee shop window carried on. Cars passed. People walked their dogs. The neon sign of a liquor store across the street flickered on, painting the dusk in strokes of red and blue. It was all a movie playing on a screen I was no longer a part of. My world had collapsed to the size of my phone, lying face down on the floor. My mind was a flat line, an empty, humming void where thoughts used to be. The video had burned a hole through my sanity. A man walked through a wall. My apartment. The simple physical laws I had built my life on had been torn up and thrown away. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a hallucination. I had the video. He had sent it to me. He wanted me to know. He wanted me to understand that the rules didn't apply to him. What do you do when the impossible is real? Kaaba! You run. I'd already done that and it led me here. You fight. How do you fight something that treats solid matter like water? You call for help. Who do you call? The police? Officer, there's a man who walks through my walls and rearranges my spy cameras. They put me in a padded room. My hand, moving with a will of its own, a tremor running through it that started deep in my bones, reached for the phone on the floor. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over my contacts. There was only one person, one anchor in the storm of unreality that was drowning me. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. Anne? Honey? Is everything all right? My mother's voice, normal, warm, real. It was like a lifeline thrown into a black ocean. A sob caught in my throat, a raw, ugly sound. I couldn't speak. Anne? Are you there? I can hear you breathing. Mom, I finally managed to choke out. The single word cracked open a dam inside me. The story flooded out, a frantic, nonsensical torrent of words. The sounds, the fingers, the cameras, the videos, the wall. I told her everything, my voice getting higher and more frantic with every sentence. I knew how I sounded. I sounded like a crazy person. I sounded like a man who had completely lost his mind. There was a long pause on the other end of the line when I finished. I could hear the faint buzz of the connection. I could picture her in her kitchen, holding the phone to her ear, a worried frown on her face. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice soft and full of concern. "It sounds like you're under a tremendous amount of stress. You haven't been sleeping, have you? Work has been getting to you. Maybe your mind is playing tricks on you." "No, Mom, it's not tricks," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I saw it. I have the video." "A video? Anyone can fake a video these days, Anne. Please, just go home. Take a hot shower. Try to get some real sleep. Maybe you should think about talking to someone, a professional." The line went quiet again. She didn't believe me. Of course she didn't. Why would she? I didn't even believe myself an hour ago. The conversation ended a few minutes later with her promising to call in the morning, and me making promises I had no intention of keeping. I hung up. The feeling wasn't relief. It was a cold, profound loneliness. I was completely and utterly on my own with this. There was nowhere else to go. Hiding in another motel felt pointless. He knew where I was. He could get to me if he wanted to. My car felt like a cage. The only place left was the one place I never wanted to see again. Apartment 4D. The walk back across the street felt like a mile. The building loomed over me. I took the stairs this time, my feet heavy on the concrete. The hallway was silent. I put my key in the lock of my door. It turned. I pushed it open. The apartment was still. Empty. Exactly as the last video had shown it. A tomb. My tomb. I needed to do something. Something normal. Something to prove I was still in control of something. Anything. I saw the mop and bucket I kept in the small utility closet. Cleaning. It was a stupid, mundane thought. But it was a thought. An action. So I did it. I filled the bucket with water and soap in the kitchen sink. I started mopping the cheap laminate floor, the rhythmic back and forth motion. A small, temporary comfort. I was just a guy cleaning his apartment, not a man being haunted by a physical goddamn ghost. Slosh. Wipe. Slosh. Wipe. The smell of lemon cleaner filled the air. I was imposing order. I was fighting back with bleach and hot water, and then it rang. It was a sound I hadn't heard in years, a shrill, metallic, piercing ring. Not my cell phone, the landline, a cheap, beige plastic phone that sat on a small end table by the couch, covered in a thin layer of dust. I'd kept the line active out of sheer laziness, a relic from a time before everyone had a supercomputer in their pocket. It hadn't rung in maybe 5 years. The ringing was violent in the quiet room. It cut through the air. 1 ring. 2. 3. My mopping stopped. I stood perfectly still, dripping mop in my hand. My heart hammered against my ribs. Who would be calling this number? Who even had this number? Rue. 4 rings. 5. It was relentless. My feet moved on their own, walking slowly towards the sound. My hand reached out. The plastic of the receiver felt old and brittle. I pressed it to my ear. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. Silence. Not the normal silence of an empty line. It was a dead, heavy silence. A silence with weight. I could feel it pressing against my eardrum. No static. No hum. Nothing. Hello? I said again, louder this time. Still nothing. A prank call. Has to be. Some kid. I was about to slam the receiver down, my nerves frayed and raw, when a voice came through the line. It was a voice that chilled my blood. It was my mother's voice. But it was wrong. All wrong. It had her pitch, her cadence, but it was flat, cold, stripped of all life, all warmth, like a recording played by a machine. Son, the voice said, why aren't you in your room? The air left my lungs. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles were white. It was the same question she had asked me, but twisted into something monstrous. Mom? I stammered, my throat closing up. What is this? The machine voice of my mother continued, calm and even. I'm right here with you. In the wall! I screamed and threw the phone. It flew across the room, the receiver dangling from its coiled cord like a hanged man. It swung back and forth, hitting the wall with a series of soft plastic thumps. But the voice didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the phone anymore. It was coming from the wall beside me. Trondi Dow, the Contrai? The voice was louder now, no longer filtered through a phone line. It was right there. My mother's voice, speaking in Vietnamese, a language she only used with me when we were alone, a language of intimacy and comfort. Now corrupted, weaponized. It slid along the plaster. Mithai con roi. I see you. I scrambled backwards, falling over the mop bucket, water sloshing onto the floor. I crab walked away, my eyes locked on the blank, solid wall. The voice was moving. I could hear it. A faint, dry scraping sound, like fabric dragging over sand, and it was moving along the wall. Following me. I got to my feet and ran. My only thought was the bedroom. A door. A lock. Some barrier. Any barrier. I burst into my room and slammed the heavy wood door shut. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the deadbolt. It clicked into place. I stumbled back, my chest heaving, my back hitting the opposite wall. Silence. The voice outside was gone. The scraping had stopped. I stood there, panting in the dark room, straining my ears. Nitalang, N-G-H-E. Nothing. Just the frantic pounding of my own heart. Maybe I was safe. Maybe the lock was enough. Maybe it couldn't get through a locked door. It was a stupid, desperate hope, and I clung to it like a dying man. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out, and sat on the floor, my gaze fixed on the locked bedroom door. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence held. My breathing started to even out. The panic began to recede, replaced by a cold, trembling dread. I was trapped in my bedroom, but I was alive. I was alone. Then I heard it. It was not from the door. It was not from the wall I was leaning against. It was from inside the room with me, a sound so soft I almost missed it. A dry, faint whisper, coming from the cheap particle board wardrobe standing in the corner of the room, a place of shadows and old clothes. It was my mother's voice again. a conspiratorial, sibilant hiss. Trochoi that? That was a fun game. The words hung in the darkness of the room. A fun game. I didn't move. My muscles were locked. My back was pressed so hard against the wall it felt like I was trying to phase through it myself. My eyes were fixed on the wardrobe, a cheap block of fake wood and shadow, the source of the whisper, my mother's voice. I couldn't stay here. The thought was a jolt of electricity. I couldn't stay in this room. I couldn't stay in this apartment. The game was over and I had lost. My mind, scrambling through the wreckage of my sanity, clawed at one single, desperate idea. A person. I needed a real, solid, flesh-and-blood person. Someone who didn't walk through walls or whisper from inside furniture. Henderson. The name surfaced from the depths. Mr. Henderson in 5D. One floor up. An ex-cop with a bad temper and a worse cough. I'd seen him maybe 3 times in the 2 years I'd lived here. He always looked at me like I was a piece of trash someone had left in the hallway. He was real. He was solid. He was a cop. He dealt with the real world. This was not the real world, but he was the closest thing I had. Getting up was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My legs trembled. Each muscle protested. I pushed myself off the floor, my gaze never once leaving the wardrobe. I felt its presence, a silent, knowing thing in the corner. I had to walk past it to get to the door. My hand reached for the deadbolt. My fingers were clumsy, numb. The click echoed like a gunshot. I pulled the door open and didn't look back. I stepped out into the living room. The landline phone was still on the floor, its receiver hanging from the cord. I ran past it. I didn't run for the front door. Not yet. I ran for the stairs. The stairwell was cold concrete and steel. My footsteps were loud, frantic, 1 flight, that's all. The door to the 5th floor hallway pushed open with a groan. The air here was the same. Stale, quiet, too quiet. 5D. The door was dark brown, the paint chipped around the frame. I raised my hand. It was shaking. What was I going to say? Sir, there's a thing in my apartment that sounds like my mom, and it lives in my walls. He'd call the men in white coats. I didn't care. A padded room was better than my room. I knocked. The sound was sharp, aggressive. My knuckles stung. I waited. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a television from inside. A commercial for car insurance. Normal. I knocked again, harder this time. Bolts slid back. The door cracked open a few inches, held by a chain. An eye appeared in the gap. It was bloodshot, narrowed with suspicion. What? The voice was a gravelly rasp. Mr. Henderson, I said, my own voice thin and shaky. I live downstairs in 4D. I need help, please. It's 2 a.m. Go away. The door started to close. No, wait! I pressed my hand against the wood. Please. Someone's in my apartment. I think they're in the walls. I knew how it sounded. I knew I was a dead man talking. The eye stared at me for a long moment. He was sizing me up, deciding if I was drunk or high or just plain crazy. I saw a flicker of something. Annoyance. Not pity. Just pure, unadulterated annoyance. He sighed, a loud, rattling sound. The chain slid free. The door opened all the way. He was just as I remembered. A big man gone soft around the middle, wearing a dirty white t-shirt and plaid pajama pants. The room behind him was dark except for the flickering blue light of the TV. The air smelled of old smoke and microwave dinners. Kid, do you know what time it is? I know, sir. I'm sorry, but I heard noises. And then a voice. It's... He cut me off with a wave of his meaty hand. It's an old building. The pipes bang. The walls settle. I hear things all the time. You get used to it. No, it's not pipes, I pleaded. My voice was cracking. It talked to me. It used my mother's voice. Henderson just stared. His face was a blank mask of tired irritation. He wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. I was just another city problem, another disturbance to his quiet, miserable life. Look, he said, his voice flat. Whatever you're on, sleep it off, or call a doctor. Don't knock on my door again. He didn't wait for a reply. He just closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was final. a nail in a coffin. I stood there in the empty hallway. The last door had closed. The last hope was gone. It was just me and it, defeated. I turned to go back to the stairwell, back down to hell. That's when I heard it, the TV inside Henderson's apartment. The volume suddenly shot up, blaring, but it wasn't the car insurance commercial anymore. It was a voice, a familiar, gravelly rasp. Henderson's voice. "It's an old building. The pipes bang." My blood turned to ice. I stopped dead. The recording of his voice played again, perfectly clear through the door. "Whatever you're on, sleep it off." It was a perfect playback of our conversation. Verbatim. And then, between the sentences, a new sound was spliced in. A sound that didn't belong. A high-pitched, digital chittering, like a corrupted audio file. A mechanical, joyless laugh. It was in there with him. It had been listening. It was using his television. It was playing with me. A wave of white-hot rage washed over the fear. This wasn't a ghost. This was a tormentor. This was a game. "Open the door!" I screamed, throwing myself against the heavy wood. I hammered on it with both fists. "Open up! I know you're in there. I know what you are." My shouting was raw, animalistic. I didn't care who heard. The whole world could burn. The bolts didn't slide back this time. There was no sound of a chain. The door just swung inward with a sudden, silent speed. Henderson stood in the doorway. He was perfectly still. The blue light from the TV cast long, dancing shadows across his face. But it was his eyes. His eyes were wrong. The bloodshot irritation was gone. They were wide, unblinking. The pupils were gone, swallowed up by a solid, milky whiteness. Like two polished stones. There was nothing behind them. No one. He didn't speak. He just lunged. It wasn't a human movement. It was clumsy, jerky. A marionette on tangled strings. His arms flailed, reaching for me. A low, guttural sound came from his throat. Not words, just a series of wet, repetitive clicks. Ba-ba-ba-ba! I stumbled back by pure instinct. His hands brushed my shirt. They were cold. So cold. I didn't think. I just reacted. I put my hands on his chest and shoved. Hard. There was no resistance. He was a big man, but he felt hollow. He went down like a sack of laundry, his head hitting the floor with a sickening wet thud. He lay there on his back, his white eyes staring at the ceiling, his mouth still making that awful clicking sound. The TV in the background was still playing the sound of the mechanical laugh, over and over. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I turned and I ran. I flew down the stairs, taking them 2, 3 at a time. My lungs burned. My only thought was the front door, the street, the outside world, away from the walls, away from the voices, away from the white eyes. I burst through the stairwell door into the ground floor lobby. The main entrance was just 20 feet away. Freedom. But the lobby wasn't empty. A group of people were standing there, maybe 5 or 6 of them, clustered near the mailboxes. Mrs. Gable from 2B, the one with the little yapping dog. The young couple from 3A, who were always arguing. A few other faces I recognized but didn't know the names of. They were just standing, silent, facing away from me, towards the front door. My sudden appearance made them stir. They turned, slowly, all at once, like a school of fish. Their heads swiveled in my direction. And I saw their eyes. All of them. Every single one. Milky white. There was no thought, no plan, just a single, primal command that bypassed my brain and went straight to my legs. Run. I didn't try to reason with them. I didn't try to talk. I collided with the cluster of bodies like a bowling ball. They were soft, yielding. There was no resistance, just the faint, papery rustle of clothing as I pushed through them. A woman stumbled back, her white eyes fixed on a point just above my head. A man didn't even turn, his head still swiveling slowly as if tracking a fly I couldn't see. The lobby air was cold on my face. The heavy glass of the front door was 5 feet away. 3, 1. My hand slammed against the push bar and the lock gave way with a heavy click. The night air hit me like a slap. It smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust fumes. It smelled real. I didn't look back. I just ran. My bare feet slapped against the gritty sidewalk, the pain a distant, welcome thing. It was proof. Proof that I was outside. Proof that I was still connected to a world where things made sense. I ran until my lungs felt like they were full of broken glass, and my legs were screaming. I cut across the street, ignoring the blare of a taxi's horn. I didn't stop until I saw the dark, skeletal trees of a small city park. I collapsed onto a cold metal bench, my body shaking uncontrollably. I was still wearing a thin t-shirt and pajama pants. The night chill seeped into my bones, but I didn't care. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around them, trying to make myself as small as possible. I stared out at the city lights, the endless river of headlights, the faint glow from windows and buildings that weren't mine. Normal things, normal people living normal lives. They weren't seeing milky white eyes. They weren't hearing whispers from wardrobes. My mind was a wreck, a frantic replay of the last few hours. Henderson's face. The TV, the clicking sound, the neighbors in the lobby. It was impossible. All of it. A mass hallucination? A gas leak? But the voice on the TV, a perfect recording of Henderson. That wasn't a gas leak. I stayed on that bench for hours. The sky slowly bled from black to a bruised purple, then to a dirty gray. The first rays of the sun cut through the buildings, casting long shadows. Daylight. It felt like a shield, a disinfectant. The horrors of the night seemed to shrink under the clean, honest light of morning. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was manageable now, less of a monster, more of a bad memory. My shivering had stopped. I was just cold and exhausted. My thoughts, for the first time, became practical. My wallet, my keys, my phone. Everything was in the apartment. My apartment. 4D. I couldn't go back there. Not to live. Never again. I would call my landlord from a payphone, tell him I was breaking the lease, that he could keep the deposit. I would go to a shelter. I would do anything. But I needed my wallet, my ID. I couldn't do anything without it. The idea was stupid, insane. But the sun was up. The city was awake. The monsters were gone. They had to be. They were creatures of the dark, of the quiet hours. All I had to do was walk in, grab my stuff, and walk out. 5 minutes. In and out. In the bright light of day. It would be fine. I convinced myself it would be fine. I stood up, my joints protesting. The walk back was a march of shame. Every step closer to the brick facade of my building felt like a step toward a grave. But the street was busy now. People walked dogs. Commuters hurried past with coffee cups. Mrs. Gable, the woman from 2B, was coming out of the front door as I approached. Her little yapping dog was on its leash, pulling her forward. She looked up at me and smiled. A normal, polite, neighborly smile. Her eyes were brown and tired, not milky white. "Morning," she said, her voice completely ordinary. I just stared at her. "Morning," I mumbled. She didn't seem to notice my bare feet or my wild-eyed expression. She just gave a little tug on the leash and continued down the street. I stood there, watching her go. Maybe I had dreamed it. A fever dream. A psychotic break brought on by stress. The thought was terrifying in its own way, but infinitely better than the alternative. I pushed the front door open. The lobby was empty. Sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The mailboxes were just mailboxes. The tile was just tile. Everything was normal. I took the stairs, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I walked down the 4th-floor hallway. It was quiet. It smelled like old carpet. It was home. My key was still in the lock of 4D. I took a deep breath, turned it, and pushed the door open. The apartment was silent. The living room was exactly as I had left it. The landline phone was on the floor, its receiver off the hook. Sunlight poured through the window, making the whole place feel less threatening. I took a tentative step inside, then another. It was just an apartment. A cheap, messy apartment. I went straight to my bedroom. My wallet and keys were on the dresser. I grabbed them, my fingers clumsy. I was about to turn and leave, to just get out and never look back. But my eyes were drawn to the wall. The wall next to the wardrobe. The one that had whispered. My breath caught in my throat. There was a scratch. It wasn't a small thing. It was a long, deep gouge in the plaster and drywall, running horizontally for about 3 feet. It was a violent, angry mark, splintering the cheap paint and digging into the pale gypsum beneath. It looked like someone had dragged a claw, or a piece of sharp metal, across the surface with immense force. It was new. It wasn't there yesterday. I knew this wall. I had stared at it for 2 years. This mark was fresh. This was not a dream. I felt a morbid, stupid curiosity pull me forward. My legs moved on their own. Part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to just run, but another, quieter part needed to know. I reached out a trembling hand. My fingertips brushed against the raw, jagged edge of the scratch. The wall vibrated. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a low-frequency hum that pulsed up my arm and into my chest. It felt alive. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire. My eyes were glued to the scratch. A line of black trickled out. It started as a single drop, emerging from the deepest part of the gouge. It wasn't paint. It was thick, oily, like tar that had been warmed by some internal heat. Another drop joined it, and another, until a thin, black line began to snake its way down the white wall. It moved slowly, defying gravity. Then the smell hit me. It was the most foul thing I had ever experienced. It was the smell of a dead thing left in a plastic bag in the sun. The smell of rotten meat and wet, disturbed grave soil. But underneath it was something else. A sharp chemical tang, like ammonia or cheap cleaning fluid, trying and failing to cover up the stench of decay. The smell filled the small room, thick and heavy. I gagged, my hand flying to my mouth, and through the wall I heard a sound. It was a low, wet growl. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to come from the very bones of the building. It was a sound of hunger, of ancient and hateful patience finally wearing thin. The vibration in the floor intensified. The black ooze began to flow faster, dripping onto the carpet with a soft, sickening patter. Get out, get out, get out, get out now. The words chanted in my head, but my feet were lead. I was frozen, mesmerized by the horror unfolding in front of me. The growl grew louder, turning into a rasping, bubbling noise. Crack! A large section of the wall, right where the scratch was, bulged outward. The plaster cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The growling stopped, replaced by a wet, tearing sound. With a sudden, explosive bang, a chunk of drywall the size of a pizza box burst from the wall and crashed to the floor, showering the room in a cloud of white dust. It revealed a hole, a perfect, dark square of absolute blackness. No pipes, no insulation, just a void. The smell of rot billowed out like heat from an oven, and from the darkness a hand shot out. It wasn't a hand. It was a weapon. It was long, impossibly long and thin, like a branch from a dead tree. There was no skin, just black, stringy sinew wrapped tight around pale, yellowish bone. 5 bony fingers tipped with broken, dirty nails flexed in the air for a fraction of a second before they found their target. The hand clamped around my right ankle. The cold was instantaneous. It wasn't the cold of ice, it was a dead cold, a void of all heat that felt like it was burning my skin. It sucked the warmth right out of me. A scream tore from my throat, raw and ragged. I stumbled backward, but the grip was like iron. It pulled. I fell hard onto my back, my head cracking against the floor. The arm began to drag me, scraping my back along the carpet, pulling me toward the black, stinking hole in my bedroom wall. Instinct took over. There was no thought, only a wild, animal panic. I twisted my body, kicking out with my free leg. My heel slammed into something hard. There was a dry, snapping sound, like a stick breaking. The grip on my ankle loosened. I kicked again, frantically, blindly. I connected with the arm, the wrist, anything I could hit. A low, hissing sound came from the hole, a sound of pain and fury. The bony fingers uncoiled. The arm shot back into the darkness. It didn't withdraw. It vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, swallowed by the void. I scrambled backward on my hands and heels, crab walking away from the hole until my back hit the far wall. I sat there, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. The hole in the wall was silent. It just stared, a black mouth in the middle of my sunlit room. I was alive. I was free. I looked down at my ankle, expecting to see blood, broken skin. There was nothing, no cut, no bruise. But where the hand had gripped me, a perfect handprint was branded onto my flesh. It wasn't a mark on my skin, it was a mark in my skin. The 5 long, bony finger marks and the shape of the palm were a shade of black that seemed to drink the light. They were stark against my pale skin. I touched it. It was cold. A deep, permanent cold that felt like it had seeped all the way down to the bone. I didn't run. I walked. Down the stairs, through the lobby and out the front door into the blinding, indifferent daylight. The cold handprint on my ankle was a brand, a permanent souvenir from hell. Each beat of my heart pumped a fresh wave of icy numbness through the mark, a constant reminder. The fear was still there, a live thing coiling in my gut, but something else was rising to meet it. Anger. A hot, clean rage that burned away the panic. This thing, whatever it was, had trespassed. It had invaded my home. It had touched me. The time for cowering in parks and running barefoot through the streets was over. It made a hole in my wall. I was going to make a bigger one. The walk to the hardware store was a haze. The city noise, the people, the traffic. It was all background static. My focus was singular. I walked past the aisles of paint chips and garden gnomes, making a straight line for the heavy tools. I grabbed the biggest sledgehammer I could find, a 10-pound head on a fiberglass handle. The weight felt good in my hands. It felt real, solid. I grabbed the long, steel crowbar, its angled end sharpened to a wicked point. At the checkout, the kid behind the counter didn't even look up from his phone. "That's a 6842. I slapped my card on the counter. He didn't ask what I was planning to demolish. He didn't care. To him, I was just another guy buying tools. The thought was strangely comforting. Walking back, the hammer rested on my shoulder like a rifle. The anger was a shield. The plan was simple. I was going to walk into my apartment, straight to the bedroom, and I was going to obliterate that section of the wall. I was going to expose whatever was hiding in the dark. No more whispers, no more games. I didn't care if it was a man or a monster. I was going to drag it into the light and end it. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The 4th floor hallway felt different now. It wasn't just old carpet and stale air. It was a hunting ground, and I was no longer the prey. I didn't bother with the key. The door was still slightly ajar from my frantic escape. I nudged it open with my foot and stepped inside, swinging the sledgehammer off my shoulder, holding it ready in both hands. The smell hit me first. That same sickeningly sweet odor of rot and chemicals. It was stronger now. It coated the back of my throat. I braced myself, expecting an ambush, a sound, anything. But the apartment was quiet. The sun still streamed through the windows. Then I saw it. On the floor, between the living room and the hallway to my bedroom, there was a message. It was written in the same thick, black, oily liquid that had oozed from the wall. The letters were shaky, drawn with a finger or a claw, but they were clear. 2 words. Help me. I stopped dead. The sledgehammer felt impossibly heavy. My anger, so pure and hot a minute ago, sputtered. A trick. It had to be a trick. A monster that tears through drywall and grabs you with a bone-chilling grip doesn't leave pleas for help. It leaves threats. It leaves body parts. What the hell was this? I took a cautious step closer. The black liquid glistened on the worn linoleum. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a taunt. It looked desperate. I looked from the words on the floor to the sledgehammer in my hands. The tool I'd brought to wage war suddenly felt like a murder weapon. Was I the villain in this story? Was I about to smash through the wall of a prison to kill the captive instead of the jailer? Doubt flooded in, cold and fast, extinguishing the last of my rage. The fear came rushing back. My eyes darted around the room. I was exposed, vulnerable. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tightened my grip on the hammer and moved slowly down the hall, the crowbar held tight in my other hand. I reached the bedroom doorway and peered inside. The hole was still there. A perfect, dark square in the sunlit wall. The chunk of drywall lay on the floor where it had fallen. The black handprint on my ankle throbbed with a deeper cold. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision. My entire plan was a smoking wreck. Fight or save? Monster or victim? Monster or victim? The wall vibrated again. I flinched, raising the hammer instinctively. But the feeling was different. It wasn't the low, hungry growl from before. It was a faint, rhythmic pulsing, and with it came a sound. Faint, but unmistakable. The sound of someone crying. A quiet, hopeless, muffled sobbing that seemed to come from deep inside the wall. It was a sound of pure misery. My gaze flickered up to the ceiling light. It was off. Then it flickered on. Off. On. Off. On. 3 short flashes. A pause. Then 3 longer flashes. On. On. Another pause. 3 short flashes again. On. Off. On. Off. On. 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 Off. S-O-S. It wasn't a random flicker. It was a signal. A distress call from inside my wall. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. The crying stopped. The light fixture went dark. For a long moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing. The sun cast a long rectangle of light on the floor, illuminating the dust motes. The silence was absolute. Then the sobbing started again, louder this time. A desperate, pleading wail that tore through the silence and straight into my chest. I made a decision. A stupid, reckless, insane decision. "I'm coming," I said to the wall. I dropped the crowbar. It clattered on the hardwood floor. I hefted the sledgehammer, positioning myself in front of the hole. My knuckles were white. My muscles screamed in protest. This was either a rescue or a suicide. There was no in-between. I swung. The hammerhead hit the drywall with a deafening crunch. Plaster dust exploded into the air, filling my nose and mouth. The sobbing from within the wall turned into a sharp, terrified shriek. "I'm trying to help," I yelled, coughing on the dust. I swung again, and again. Violent, desperate swings. Large chunks of drywall and plaster rained down. The wall groaned. The shriek from inside grew louder, more frantic with every impact. It sounded like I was hurting it. It sounded like I was killing it. Smash. A web of cracks spread across the surface. Smash. A section the size of a car door buckled inward. Smash. With a final, splintering roar, the entire section of the wall gave way. It collapsed inward, into the darkness, taking the hole with it and leaving a ragged, gaping doorway into the black void behind my bedroom. A cloud of thick, white dust billowed out, so dense I couldn't see. I stumbled back, gasping, my arms aching. I waited for the dust to settle, the hammer held loosely in my hands, my body trembling with adrenaline and dread. What had I done? What was going to come out of that hole? Slowly, the dust cleared. The space behind the wall was not an empty void. It was shallow, no more than 4 feet deep, like a crawl space between apartments. And it wasn't empty. Curled in the far corner, amidst the broken plaster and splintered wood studs, was a figure. It was a girl, or the shape of one. She was translucent, her form wavering like a mirage on a hot road. She wore a simple white dress from another era, now smudged with ethereal dust and grime. Her long, dark hair obscured her face as she huddled on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, quaking with fear. The whimpering sound was coming from her. It wasn't a monster. It was a ghost. My mind struggled to process it. The hand, the growl, the strength that had dragged me across the floor. It couldn't have come from this terrified, trembling thing. This was the source of the warnings. The SOS, the desperate cry for help. Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. I lowered the sledgehammer. "It's okay," I said, my voice soft. "I'm not going to hurt you." The spirit slowly lifted her head. Her face was pale and indistinct, her features blurred, but her eyes were wide and dark with a terror that felt ancient. But she wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on something over my shoulder, on the space behind me. Her translucent lips parted. No sound came out, but I could read the words as she formed them. A silent, frantic scream. "It's here!" A sudden chill, colder than the handprint, colder than death itself, swept through the room. I heard a sound. A wet, dripping noise. Not from the hole in the wall. From everywhere. I spun around. My blood turned to ice. The black ooze was no longer just a small puddle on the floor or a single line trickling from a scratch. It was seeping from every corner of the room. It bled from the seams where the walls met the ceiling. It wept from the edges of the window frame. It bubbled up from the baseboards. Dozens of thick, black, oily lines snaked down the walls, converging on the floor, turning my sunlit bedroom into a canvas of creeping, silent horror. The hole in the wall hadn't been the monster's cage. It had been her hiding place, and I had just destroyed it. My brain refused to work. It was a circuit board with water poured over it, shorting out, sparking uselessly. The girl in the wall, the ghost. She wasn't the thing that had grabbed me. She wasn't the source of that hateful, hungry growl. She was hiding from it. The SOS flickering on the light fixture, the desperate message scrawled on the floor, the terrified sobbing. They weren't meant to scare me. They were meant to warn me. I wasn't the target. I was just the idiot with a sledgehammer who'd knocked down the door to her panic room. The black ooze dripped, a sound like thick syrup falling onto a hot plate. A slow, steady plip, plip, plip. It wasn't just coming down the walls anymore. It was pulling itself together on the hardwood floor, forming shallow, shifting pools. The sweet, chemical rot filled my lungs, thick and heavy. I felt like I was breathing in poison. The translucent girl didn't turn to me. She didn't have to. Her terror was a physical force in the room, a pressure against my skin. With a hand that trembled so hard it barely looked solid, she raised a single, wavering finger. She wasn't pointing at the growing black mess. She was pointing past me, towards my desk in the corner, towards my laptop. As if on cue, the dark screen flashed to life. Not the gentle wake-up from sleep mode, but a harsh, instant glare of blue-white light that made me flinch. My password screen was gone. The desktop was gone. There was only a single web browser window, open and waiting. My hands were at my sides. I hadn't touched it. The ghost a few feet away, her form flickering like a weak flame, pointed again, a frantic, jabbing motion. Look, now! My feet felt like they were bolted to the floor. Turning my back on the creeping oil felt like the stupidest thing a person could do. But the girl's silent, desperate command was stronger than my fear. I took a stiff, robotic step. Then another. I reached the desk and stared at the screen. It was an old news site, a web archive. The page was a list of links, all from the same local paper, spanning decades. The headline of the first article sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Local man vanishes from fourth floor apartment 1987. My finger trembled as I moved the trackpad, my mind screaming at me not to. I clicked it. A grainy black and white photo of a man with a mustache and tired eyes stared back at me. He lived alone, complained to the landlord about strange noises in the walls. A week later, his apartment was found empty. The door was locked from the inside. He was never seen again. I clicked the back button. My throat was dry. College student missing from downtown apartment building 1999. This one had a color photo. A young woman with a bright smile. She told her friend on the phone she thought someone was getting into her apartment, moving her things around. She thought she was going crazy. Police found her phone on the kitchen counter. No signs of forced entry. The door was deadbolted. My apartment. This building. The fourth floor. It was always the fourth floor. Loner declared legally dead 7 years after disappearance. 2014. Another man. Another solitary life. Another apartment on this floor. His last text message to his sister was one word. Listen. A pattern. Not a haunting. A hunt. This building was a hunting ground, and its prey was always the same. People like me. Gaskodak Dothi, the urban loner. No one to notice you're gone for a few days. No one to call when you don't answer the phone. We were easy targets. Food that wouldn't be missed. The black liquid on the floor was spreading faster now. The individual puddles were connecting, forming a dark, glossy lake that was slowly covering the floorboards. As I watched, a ripple disturbed its surface. From the center of the largest pool, a shape began to rise. It wasn't fast. It was a slow, deliberate extrusion of the black ooze, like a stalagmite of tar growing in reverse. It formed a face, a human face, contorted in a silent scream, its mouth wide and its eyes hollow. Then it melted back into the pool. Another one rose next to it, and another. The faces of the missing. The man with the mustache. The smiling student. A gallery of silent, suffering spirits trapped in the black sludge. The room grew cold. Not a draft from an open window, a deep, penetrating cold that sank right into my bones. My breath plumed in front of my face. The light from the laptop screen was the only warm thing left, and then I heard it again. The growl. It wasn't muffled by drywall anymore. It wasn't a vibration under my feet. It was loud. It was close. A low, wet rumble that seemed to come from all directions at once. It was the sound of a predator that had been patient for a very, very long time, and was done with the game. Slam. The front door to my apartment crashed shut with the force of a battering ram. The noise was so violent the walls shook. I heard the distinct, heavy thunk of the deadbolt sliding home. I was locked in. I spun away from the desk, my heart a wild animal trapped in my ribs. I stared at the door, then back at the black sea on my floor. No, I whispered. No, no, no. Panic, pure and undiluted, finally took over. The sledgehammer lay forgotten near the hole in the wall. It felt 1,000,000 miles away. My only thought was escape. I lunged for the bedroom door, planning to slam it shut, to buy myself a few seconds. Before my hand could touch the knob, the ghost girl let out a silent shriek. She stabbed her finger downward, towards the space under my bed. Hide. There was no time to think. The growl rose in pitch, becoming a guttural, throaty snarl. It was right outside the bedroom now. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself to the floor, the impact jarring my teeth, and scrambled, crab-like, into the darkness under the bed frame. I pressed myself flat against the dusty floor, my cheek against the cold wood. My eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the sliver of the room I could see. From my hiding spot, I saw them. They stepped into the bedroom, emerging from the blackness in the hallway. Feet. But they weren't feet. They were long, spindly legs, like those of a monstrous spider or a praying mantis, but formed entirely from the glossy, black liquid. There was no body, just these impossible limbs moving with a disjointed, unnatural grace. They moved without a sound. One leg would stretch forward, its tip dissolving into a small puddle on the floor, before the ooze would flow and reform the limb a foot ahead. Another followed, and then a third and a fourth. They walked slowly through the room, methodical, searching. The low growl was their sound, the engine of their movement. One leg paused, its sharp point hovering inches from the sledgehammer, then moved on. It wasn't interested in weapons. I held my breath until my lungs burned. A single tear of sheer terror escaped my eye and traced a clean path through the dust on my cheek. Don't see me. Please, God, don't see me. The legs stopped. All four of them. They stood in a semicircle right in front of the bed, right in front of my face. I could see the light from the laptop glinting off their slick, black surfaces. I was close enough to touch them. A drop of the black fluid detached from the nearest leg and fell silently to the floor, re-merging with the puddle spreading beneath me. The smell was overwhelming. I squeezed my eyes shut. This is it. This is how I end. A headline on a dusty web archive. A face in the black ooze. Silence. The growl stopped. The only sound was the frantic drumming of my own heart. I stayed frozen, every muscle screaming. Maybe it didn't see me. Maybe it would move on. Slowly, cautiously, one of the spider-like legs began to lower itself. It bent at a grotesque, impossible joint, descending towards the floor, towards the gap under the bed. It was peering under, looking for me. The leg paused, its tip just inches from my face. Then, on the flat, black surface of its joint, a slit appeared. It tore open horizontally, not like a wound, but like a lid rolling back. From the darkness within, a single, blood-red eye blazed into existence. It wasn't an animal eye or a human eye. It was pure light, pure malevolence, and it was looking directly into mine. Time stopped. My blood didn't just run cold, it turned to solid ice in my veins. The world shrank to the space between my eyes and that single burning ember of hate. It wasn't looking at me like an animal looks at prey. It was looking at me like a god looks at an insect. Something to be crushed without a thought. My next breath was a death sentence I hadn't inhaled yet. My entire life, every stupid choice and small victory, ended here, on a dusty floor, staring into an impossible red eye. I was dead. The thought wasn't panic anymore. It was a flat, dull fact. Dead. Then, a flicker. A distortion in the air, right between me and the leg. Like heat haze off summer asphalt. The translucent girl solidified out of nothingness. She wasn't solid, not really, just a more coherent version of the air. She stood facing the leg, her back to me. A fragile shield of static and memory. She didn't do anything, she just existed, a silent, trembling act of defiance. The red eye blinked, a slow, vertical shudder that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It retracted slightly, pulling back from the ghost girl as if confused. A predator, studying a phenomenon it didn't understand. The leg, that whole impossible limb of black liquid, drew back a few inches. It wasn't scared. It was curious. It was distracted. The girl turned her head, her see-through profile an image of pure terror. She looked at me, her mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Her message was clear. It sees me, not you. Go. But where could I go? And then, in that brief moment of reprieve, my brain, which had completely shut down, flickered back to life with a horrifying spark of understanding. It wasn't a ghost, that thing. It wasn't a demon or some vengeful spirit. The news articles on the laptop screen flashed in my mind. The missing people. The strange noises. The black ooze. Lynn, the ghost girl, wasn't the monster. She was another victim. A record of its passage. My God. It wasn't supernatural. It was biological. I wasn't in a haunted house. I was in a nest. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The scraping sounds weren't ghostly echoes. They were claws on concrete. The growling wasn't a spirit's rage. It was a hungry stomach. The black ooze wasn't ectoplasm. It was a secretion, a digestive fluid, a way of moving and hunting. This thing, this creature, wasn't just in the walls. In some way I couldn't comprehend. It was the walls. It was a predator perfectly adapted to its environment. An apex predator for the urban loners of the fourth floor. And what about the girl? The flickering light, the SOS, the message on the floor, that was her. Of course it was. She wasn't manipulating the apartment. She was manipulating the creature. Like tapping on the shell of a giant turtle, she was using its own body to send out a warning. Her ghostly existence was some kind of psychic echo, an imprint left behind in the creature's own nervous system, a system made of plumbing and electrical wire. The thought was so insane it had to be true. I wasn't being haunted by a ghost. I was seeing the after-image of a previous meal, screaming through the monster that ate her. The leg didn't stay distracted for long. It seemed to make a decision. With a fluid, silent motion, it pulled back completely, retracting from beneath the bed. It dissolved back into the black lake on the floor. For a half-second, I thought it was leaving. Then the floor began to vibrate. It started as a low hum, the kind you feel in your teeth more than you hear. It wasn't the upstairs neighbor. It wasn't a truck on the street. The vibration was coming from the floor itself, from the walls, from the ceiling. The whole apartment became a single, massive tuning fork, and I was pinned to its center. The dusty floorboards beneath my cheek buzzed against my skin. A spiderweb of cracks raced across the ceiling plaster, and a fine powder of white dust rained down. coating everything. The deep hum intensified, building into a groaning, grinding roar. It was the sound of immense weight shifting, the sound of concrete grinding against rusted rebar, the sound of a body far too large for its container beginning to move. The black liquid on the floor stopped spreading. Instead, it began to retreat, flowing backwards, being drawn into the baseboards, sucked into the hole in the wall, pulled back into the creature's mass like a tongue, retracting into a mouth. The ghost girl flickered wildly, her entire form dissolving and reforming with every shudder of the building. She looked at me, her eyes wider than I thought possible, and her silent scream was one of ultimate validation. "You see? You finally see?" Gurkha agreed. The trap wasn't the locked door. The trap was the entire room, the entire building. There was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. A wet, tearing noise. The sound of drywall being ripped apart from the inside. It came from the wall where I'd smashed the hole, but it wasn't just from the hole. The entire surface of the wall began to bulge outwards, the paint cracking and peeling. The polite, flat surface of my bedroom wall contorted, pushed from within by something immense. The roar became a wet, organic shriek of effort. With a final, explosive crash, the wall gave way. It wasn't an attack. It was a birth. A mass of something impossible surged into the room. It was not the elegant liquid hunter from before. This was the thing behind the mask. A churning, writhing knot of slick, pinkish meat, translucent and pulsing with a sick, inner light. Wires, copper, red, and yellow, were threaded through it like veins, sparking faintly where they were torn loose from the wall. An old rusted iron pipe, slick with black ooze, served as a grotesque central bone, bits of plaster and wood still clinging to it. It was a tumorous fusion of biology and architecture, an organism that had not just lived within the building, but had merged with it, consuming and incorporating its structure into its own body. The smell of ozone from the sparking wires mixed with the sweet rot, a perfume from the deepest, darkest corner of hell. This was the main body, the thing that nested, the thing that hunted. The spindly legs were just feelers, just expendable limbs sent out to search. This was the core. It paid no attention to the sledgehammer. It paid no attention to the laptop, still glowing in the corner. Its raw, undifferentiated mass, a nightmare of flesh and construction material, heaved itself across the floor. It had no eyes I could see, but I felt its attention lock onto the bed. Onto me. It was done playing, it was done hunting, it was time to eat. With a gurgling roar that shook the cheap bed frame, it lunged. A wave of meat and wire and pipe surged forward, aiming to collapse the bed, to crush me, to absorb me into its hideous form. No! The shriek wasn't silent this time. It ripped through the air, thin and sharp. The ghost girl, Lynn, threw herself forward. She launched her flickering, translucent body directly into the path of the oncoming monstrosity. It was like a moth flying into a blast furnace. For a single, impossible moment, she held her ground. Her form flared with brilliant white light where it made contact with the creature's flesh, a sizzling, electrical sound filling the room. The creature paused, its advance halted by this tiny, defiant spark of a soul. She was screaming, a high-pitched, digital wail of agony as the creature's mass began to envelop her, to pull her in. Her light flickered. Her form was being pulled apart, shredded, absorbed into the pulsing meat. She was dying a second time. She looked at me, one last time. Her face, half dissolved into the monster, was no longer terrified. It was resolved, and then a thought, not a sound, slammed into my mind. It wasn't a whisper. It was a brand. A single, desperate, final instruction burned directly onto my soul. Fire! Her light winked out. The sizzling stopped. She was gone. The creature, its brief interruption over, let out a bellow of triumph and lunged again, the full weight of its grotesque body crashing down on the bed above me. The weight of the bed frame crashed down, a splintering crack that should have been the end punctuation to my life. Wood and cheap mattress springs collapsed on the spot where I had been a second ago. But I wasn't there. I was under it. The world reduced to a coffin of dust bunnies and the groaning protest of failing wood. The monster's full weight was on the wreckage above me, pinning the mattress to the floor, leaving me in a space just tall enough to breathe. My breath. It came in ragged, useless little sips. Air tasted like old dust and the ozone rot of the thing above. It wasn't moving. It was just resting on its prize. A low, wet, rhythmic pulsing started, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards into my jaw. Through the mangled springs, I could see a sickly pinkish light cycling within its mass, like a slow-motion lightning storm trapped in meat. It was doing something to her. To the memory of her. It was digesting the light that had been Lynn. And then her last gift, her last scream, echoed in the hollows of my skull. Fire! The word wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. A weapon. My brain, seizing on the only instruction it had, kicked into a gear I didn't know I had. A rapid, frantic inventory. Fire. Kitchen? No. Stove was electric. Junk drawer? Yes. A cheap plastic lighter, the one for scented candles. What else? What for fuel? The thought snapped into focus, a perfect image from 1,000 action movies. Bathroom. Under the sink, a can of deodorant, aerosol. Next to it, in the medicine cabinet, a plastic bottle of rubbing alcohol. Flammable. Both of them. A plan. A stupid, suicidal movie logic plan. It was the only plan I had. I had to move. The pulsing from above was steady, hypnotic. The thing was occupied, distracted. This was my chance, my only chance. I pressed my palms flat against the dirty floor and began to push myself backward an inch at a time. The scraping of my jacket on the wood was a gunshot in the quiet. I froze. The pulsing didn't change. I moved again. My head cleared the wreckage of the bed. I was out. The room was a catastrophe. The far wall was a gaping wound of plaster, wires, and oozing biological horror. The creature itself was a heaving, organic tumor, fused with the debris of my bedroom. It covered the entire back half of the room, its main mass slumped over the ruined bed. It was still pulsing, still glowing from within. It paid me no mind. I got to my knees, then to my feet. My legs were jelly. Every instinct screamed at me to run out the front door and never look back. But the door was death. It had shown me that. The only way out was through. I took a step toward the hallway. The floorboard creaked, a sound like a breaking bone. The pulsing stopped. The pink light inside the creature died. A deep hum replaced it, a sound that vibrated in my chest. It knew. It wasn't digesting anymore. It was listening. I didn't hesitate. I bolted. My bare feet slapped against the cheap laminate of the hallway. I didn't look back. I slammed into the bathroom doorframe, my shoulders screaming in protest. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled with the doorknob. It turned. I fell inside, crashing against the tub, and kicked the door shut behind me. I didn't lock it. What was the point? Darkness. Not total. A sliver of gray light from the hallway filtered under the door. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs. I scrambled on my hands and knees to the vanity. My fingers found the knob on the cabinet door beneath the sink. I yanked it open. Cans and bottles clattered. My hand closed around the cool, familiar shape of the deodorant can. I pulled it out. Medicine cabinet. I stood up, my back pressed against the cold tile wall. I swung the mirrored door open. It squeaked. I froze, holding my breath. From the other room, a new sound. A wet, tearing noise. The sound of something pulling itself free. No time. My eyes scanned the shelves. Antiseptic wipes, toothpaste, a forgotten bottle of aspirin. There. The clear plastic bottle, blue cap. 70% isopropyl alcohol. I grabbed it. The junk drawer in the kitchen. The lighter. I needed the lighter. My stomach turned to ice. It was in the other room. Past it. A loud snap echoed from the bedroom, followed by the sound of something heavy whipping through the air and slamming into the hallway wall. Plaster rained down. It was moving. It was hunting again. There was no way to get to the kitchen. My mind raced. Fire! Fire! How? Hope shriveled in my gut. It was over. I was trapped in a bathroom with a can of deodorant and rubbing alcohol, but no way to ignite them. Then I saw it, on the small shelf above the toilet. Overlooked, ignored for months. A book of matches from a steakhouse I'd gone to on a long dead date. A tiny cardboard rectangle of salvation. My hand trembled as I snatched it. I fumbled it open. A dozen little red-tipped soldiers, waiting. I had my weapon. Another sound from the hallway, closer this time. A scraping, dragging noise. It was pulling its mass out of the bedroom. A thick, wet smack, like a side of beef hitting the floor, made the whole apartment shudder. It was in the hall, right outside the door. I backed away until my shoulders hit the tiled wall of the shower. I held the deodorant can in my right hand, the bottle of alcohol clutched in my left. I tore a single match from the book with my teeth and held it between my thumb and forefinger. The doorknob began to turn. It jiggled once, twice. Then, a raw physical force slammed against the flimsy wood. The door bulged inward, the frame cracking. It wasn't trying to open the lock. It was coming through. A new sound started, a high-pitched whine. It came from the walls of the bathroom itself. The light fixture above me flickered violently. Thin black tendrils, no thicker than bootlaces, began to push their way through the cracks in the ceiling drywall. They weren't wires. They were feelers, glistening with the same black ooze, dripping onto the floor with a soft sizzle. The room wasn't safe. The trap was closing. Crack. A thick, muscular pseudopod of flesh and wire punched straight through the center of the door, showering me with splinters. It was not a limb. It was just a battering ram of meat. It twisted, widening the hole, shredding the wood. The stench of rotten ozone flooded the small space. It was now or never. The thing in the doorway pulled back, preparing for another strike. I didn't wait. I lunged forward, uncapping the alcohol with my thumb. I threw the entire contents of the bottle through the shattered hole in the door, soaking the thing on the other side. Then, a roar of fury from the hallway. It knew. Another limb, this one made entirely of sparking electrical cables braided together like a bullwhip, lashed through the hole. It wasn't aimed at me. It snapped sideways and obliterated the toilet tank. Porcelain exploded. Water gushed across the floor. It was trying to stop the fire before it started. The room was transforming into a kill box. The tendrils from the ceiling were lowering, writhing like a nest of snakes. The whip-like cable retracted and smashed the sink, shattering the mirror. Shards of glass rained down around me. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It was coming. The great mass of it surged forward, and the entire door frame disintegrated. The monster filled the doorway, a churning, heaving wall of fused flesh, pipe, and sparking wire. The alcohol I'd thrown had soaked its front, dripping from the mangled rebar that served as its skeleton. It loomed over me, a god of filth and decay. Its central mass swelled. It was done playing. It was going to crush me. My hands moved on their own, raw survival instinct. I dropped the empty alcohol bottle. I raised the deodorant can, my thumb on the plastic nozzle. I brought the matchbook up. My thumb scraped the striker strip. Nothing. My hand was wet from the gushing water on the floor. The monster lunged. I wiped the matchbook on my jeans, a single, frantic motion. I scraped it again. A tiny, beautiful, perfect spark flared to life. The monster was a foot away, its horrifying mass set to engulf me. I jammed my thumb down on the deodorant can and thrust my hand forward, pushing the lit match into the aerosol stream. Whoosh! A jet of pure, brilliant fire erupted from the can. A roaring torrent of blue and orange flame that hit the creature square in its center mass. The chemical accelerant mixed with the alcohol, and the effect was explosive. The entire front of the monster was consumed in a ball of fire. The sound it made was not a scream of animal pain, it was a shriek. A piercing, high-frequency electronic wail that vibrated in my bones and made my teeth ache. It was a sound of processing, of synthesis. The flames weren't just burning it, they were sinking into it. The fire wasn't charring its pinkish flesh, it was changing it. I watched, frozen in horror, as the flaming sections began to glow, not with the orange of the fire, but with a white-hot incandescence. The copper wires woven through its body burned with a fierce electric blue. The wet, soft flesh sizzled, hissed, and began to harden, forming a blackened, obsidian-like shell. The fire was not a weapon. It was a forge. The gurgling roar it had made before was gone, replaced by that clean, terrifying digital shriek of transformation. It pulled back slightly, its new, hardened carapace gleaming in the firelight. It was bigger, stronger, faster. I had not found its weakness. I had triggered the next stage of its evolution. The heat wasn't killing it. It was feeding it. And it was done feeding. It looked at me, not with eyes, but with an intelligent, focused hate that radiated from its entire being. I stared at the monster I had created, the deodorant can sputtering its last gasp of fuel in my useless hand. The fire died out. The creature stood in the ruins of the doorway, its new body slick and black and perfect. And it took a step toward me. The can sputtered in my hand, a pathetic hiss of dying fuel. The last flicker of orange danced across the monster's new shell and then went out. Silence fell, heavy and hot. The bathroom was a wreck of shattered porcelain and splintered wood. The air smelled of burnt hair, melted plastic, and ozone. It stood in the ruined doorway, a monument of black, hardened flesh and fused metal. It was not the heaving, organic mass it had been seconds ago. The fire had burned away its weakness, baked it into something hard and perfect. A weapon, wires snaked through its obsidian body, glowing with a soft blue internal light, like veins filled with electricity. It was still, watching me. My brain was a flat line. My only plan, my one suicidal movie logic gambit, had not just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. I hadn't hurt it. I had helped it. I had fed it the one thing it needed to become its final, terrible self. It took a step, not the wet, dragging slap of before. This was a clean, sharp sound. A click-scrape of something hard and heavy on the tiled floor. It moved with a new grace, a predator's confidence. It lowered what might have been its head, and the blue light in its wires pulsed, brighter now. It was learning, processing, assessing the pathetic, sweating thing that had just completed its transformation. My body moved before my mind did. A single, animal command, back. My feet slipped on the wet floor. I scrambled away from it, my back hitting the ruined wall where the sink used to be. My hand, still clutching the empty deodorant can, dropped it. It clattered uselessly on the tile. The sound was a gunshot. The creature's head analog snapped toward the noise. It took another step into the bathroom, its bulk forcing the broken door frame to splinter and groan. The walls of the small room seemed to shrink. It was too big, too solid. There was no way around it. The hallway, my only path to the front door, was completely blocked by its new, armored form. Trapped. The word hit me like a physical blow. I was trapped in this tiny, demolished room with the thing I had created. It shifted its immense weight, and a new sound filled the air, a low-frequency hum, the sound of a massive electrical transformer. The plaster on the wall beside me began to crack, a spiderweb of fissures spreading from the floor to the ceiling. The building itself couldn't handle the energy it was putting out. As it moved, its shoulder scraped against the wall it had just emerged from. A huge section of drywall, weakened by the fire and the impact, ripped away from the studs and crashed to the floor in a cloud of white dust, and I saw it, my eyes, darting everywhere for a weapon, an exit, anything, locked onto the space the drywall had covered. It wasn't just concrete and studs. There was something else, a small square metal plate, dull gray, and bolted directly into the building's concrete skeleton. It was grimy, covered in years of construction dust, but the light from the creature's own body cast just enough of a glow. There was writing on it. Stamped, blocky, military-style letters. I squinted, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the swirling dust, I could make out the words. Project Chimera, Asset 01. Social Experiment No. 7. The words didn't compute. It was like reading a language I'd never seen before. Chimera? Asset? Social Experiment? This was an apartment building in the middle of the city, a cheap one. This made no sense. The creature took another step. Click-scrape. Closer. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my teeth. And then, my brain made the connection. A series of facts slammed into place with the force of a car crash. The sprinklers. The fire had filled the whole back of the apartment with thick, acrid smoke. The fire alarm should have been screaming. The sprinklers should have drenched everything. But nothing happened. Not a drop of water. Not a single beep. I had glanced at the smoke detector in the hall 1,000 times. A cheap plastic circle. Its little red light had never been on. Not once. I just assumed the battery was dead. The front door. Made of solid steel. The reinforced frame. I'd thought it was for security in a bad neighborhood. This wasn't an apartment. It was a container. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a break-in. It was an experiment. And I was the rat in the cage. The noises in the walls, the whispers, the fear, it was all part of the design. Lynn. The memory of her twisted into a weapon. That was a stimulus. To see how the specimen would react. I wasn't a victim of circumstance. I was the subject. The horror of that realization was colder and sharper than any physical fear. The creature in front of me wasn't the sum of my terror. It was just a tool. It was Asset 01. The name implied there could be others. The number 7 on the plate implied this had been done before. 6 other times. To 6 other people. The creature blocked the hall. It filled the doorway. The hum intensified, and the light fixture above me flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the thing's own internal, predatory glow. It had cut the power to the room. It was controlling the environment, sipping my options away, one by one. Every exit was a dead end. The building was the trap. There was no calling for help. There was no one to call. They were all in on it. Or they were just gone. Whoever they were. The people who put that metal plate in my wall. My mind raced, fueled by a new, adrenaline-laced terror. Fire fed it. It absorbed the heat, the energy. It used it to evolve. So what was the opposite of fire? What was the opposite of heat? Cold. The word was a life raft in a sea of fire, cold. Outside, it was the middle of a brutal winter. The temperature had been dropping all week. If heat made it strong, maybe, just maybe, extreme cold would make it weak. My eyes shot past the creature, down the short hallway, to the living room, to the large, single-pane window that looked out over the street. It was my only chance, a stupid, desperate, last-ditch effort. But it was a chance. First, I needed to get past the asset. My gaze fell on the wreckage. Near the broken toilet, half submerged in water, was the heavy plumber's wrench I'd used to try and fix the leak under the sink last month. It was heavy. Solid steel. Not a weapon to kill it, but maybe enough to distract it. I didn't think. I acted. I lunged for the wrench, my hands plunging into the cold, grimy water. I grabbed it. The creature reacted instantly. It let out a new sound, not a roar, but a high-frequency shriek, like metal grinding against metal. A whip-like tendril of braided copper wire shot from its torso, faster than I could track. It didn't aim for me. It slammed into the wall where my head had just been, pulverizing the tile and drywall. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I pivoted, roaring, and hurled the heavy wrench with all my strength, not at its body, but at the wall on the opposite side of the hall. The wrench spun end over end and struck the wall with a tremendous crack. The creature, its senses attuned to every impact, every vibration, instinctively turned its main body toward the new sound. It was only for a second. That was all I had. I bolted. I launched myself through the space it had just vacated. My bare feet slapping against the laminate floor, I didn't dare look back. I could hear it behind me, that clean, sharp scraping sound as it realized the trick and began to pursue. It was fast. So much faster than before. I burst into the living room. It was a disaster zone, furniture overturned, deep gouges in the walls from an earlier stage of this nightmare. The window was ahead of me. My salvation. I needed something to break it. My eyes scanned the room in a panic. Nothing, no chairs left upright, nothing heavy enough. Then I saw it, leaning against the far wall, right where I'd left it after helping my dad with a demolition job months ago. A 10-pound sledgehammer. A perfect, beautiful instrument of destruction. The scraping was right behind me. The hum was so loud it felt like it was inside my own skull. I sprinted for the hammer, grabbing its wooden handle. The wood was smooth, solid in my sweaty palms. I didn't have time to get a proper swing. I just turned and ran the last few feet to the window, holding the hammer out in front of me like a battering ram. The creature was entering the living room. I could feel the pressure change in the air as its bulk displaced it. I put all my weight behind the lunge. "Get out!" I screamed, a raw, ragged sound torn from my throat. The head of the sledgehammer hit the window. The glass didn't crack, it didn't shatter, it exploded. A deafening boom echoed through the apartment as the entire pane of glass blew outward into the night, taking the frame with it. A wall of frigid, biting winter air blasted into the room. It was a physical shock, stealing the breath from my lungs and making my skin burn. The sudden, extreme drop in temperature was immediate and violent. Behind me, the creature shrieked. It was a sound of pure agony, a digital, screeching wail of systems failing. The steady blue glow in its veins flickered erratically, turning from blue to a sickly yellow. It recoiled, stumbling back from the torrent of cold air as if it had been struck. It worked. Oh my God, it worked. A wave of hysterical relief washed over me. I turned to scramble through the broken window, to jump the 10 feet to the ground, to run, and never stop running. Freedom was right there. I put one hand on the broken sill, my eyes adjusting to the darkness outside. I looked out, ready to leap, and froze. The street below was empty, silent, dark. The streetlights were all out. The entire block was pitch black. No cars, no people, no sign of life. Across the street, the opposing apartment building was a dark monolith. Except for the roof. On the flat roof of the building directly opposite my window, there were figures, 3 of them. They were just silhouettes against the faint, polluted glow of the distant city sky. They were perfectly still. They were wearing long coats that flapped in the sudden wind I had unleashed. White coats. They were watching. As I stared, my blood turning to ice, one of the figures raised something to its eyes. Binoculars. It was a clear, unmistakable motion. They weren't hiding. They had been observing the whole time. The shriek of the creature behind me subsided into a low, pained warble. I was no longer its focus. It was fighting for its own survival against the cold. I hadn't escaped the experiment. I had just introduced a new variable. I was still the rat. They were still the scientists. And they were all watching to see what I would do next. The cold was a solid thing. It slammed into my chest, a physical force that drove the air from my lungs in a single, ragged gasp. My skin screamed, instantly numb and burning at the same time. The thin t-shirt I wore was useless. It might as well have been paint. Behind me, the creature's high-frequency shriek dropped into a gurgling, bubbling warble. The blue light in its wire-laced body pulsed weakly, a dying heartbeat. It stumbled back, away from the shattered window, away from the Arctic blast that was its poison. But my eyes were not on it. They were locked on the roof across the street. 3 figures. White coats flapping in the wind. My act of desperation had unleashed. They just stood there. One of them held binoculars to his eyes. He wasn't even trying to hide it. The pieces didn't just click into place. They were hammered in, a cold, brutal logic that cut through the panic. Project Chimera, Asset 01, Social Experiment Number 7. The empty street wasn't a coincidence. The dead streetlights weren't a power outage. It was a stage. Every part of it was controlled. The silent buildings, the absolute darkness. They had cleared the block. They were watching a show, my show. The men in the white coats weren't saviors. They weren't a rescue team on the way. They were the ones who had put the plate in my wall. They were the ones who had unlatched Asset 01. They weren't going to help. They were taking notes. My gaze snapped away from them. I was a rat. And they had just watched me solve one part of the maze. The fire made it stronger. The cold made it weaker. Fine. But the maze wasn't just my apartment. The maze was this whole goddamn block. The street was not an exit. It was just a bigger cage with more spectators. There was only one way out. Down. My eyes fell to the balcony of the apartment directly below mine. 9, maybe 10 feet. A survivable drop. The railing was concrete. I could land, roll, smash the glass of that patio door and get inside. Another apartment, another set of walls between me and them. A new place to hide. A new place to think. It wasn't a plan. It was an instinct. A single, desperate command shouted by the animal part of my brain. Go. Now. I gripped the jagged edge of the window frame, my bare feet crunching on shattered glass. The cold was a constant punishment, but the adrenaline was a fire in my veins. I leaned out, ignoring the slickness of the melting frost forming on the sill. My muscles tensed for the jump. My eyes scanned the balcony below for a clear landing spot. And then I saw it. It wasn't right. The sliding glass door to that apartment, the one I was about to break, was already broken. It was shattered from the inside out. Shards of glass littered the concrete floor of the balcony, glinting faintly in the ambient light from the distant city sky. In the center of the dark opening, a shadow moved. I froze. My breath hitched. The shadow resolved itself. It was an arm. A long, black, twitching limb made of the same obsidian flesh and fused wiring as the thing behind me. It was scraping against the edge of the broken doorframe, clawing at the air. It wasn't frantic. It was questing, searching. A wave of nausea hit me, so powerful it almost made me lose my grip. It wasn't just my apartment. A sound confirmed it. It started above me. A high-pitched, metallic screech. The same sound Asset 01 had made, but from another throat. It was followed by a woman's scream, sharp and real, cut off with a wet, final choke. Then a crash from the apartment to my left. The sound of splintering wood and a deep, guttural roar. From below, from the apartment with the twitching arm, came a heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. The sound of something massive and deliberate ramming against an interior wall, trying to break through. The sounds multiplied, a symphony from hell rising all around me. Glass shattering on the first floor. A monstrous bellow from somewhere deep inside the building's core. The shriek of tortured metal 2 floors up. The entire building was screaming. It was a hive, an anthill kicked over, and I was just one of the ants. The realization was a punch to the gut. This wasn't a single monster trapped in my walls. They weren't in my walls. The walls belonged to them. A family. A colony. A network of them threaded through the concrete and steel skeleton of the whole structure. Project Chimera wasn't one asset. It was a system. And I was just subject number 7 to be dropped into the nest. I wasn't being haunted, I was being fed to them. I stumbled back from the window, away from the promise of a 10-foot drop into another, identical hell. The icy wind followed me, a ghost clinging to my back. My escape route was gone. Every door, every window, was just an entrance to a different part of the same monstrous trap. The warbling sound from the creature in my living room changed. The pained, bubbling noise began to subside. The dim, yellow light in its veins flickered, then stabilized, slowly brightening back toward blue. It was adapting. The initial shock of the cold was wearing off. It was processing the new environment, recalibrating. I grabbed the sledgehammer from the floor, my knuckles white. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat against the cacophony outside. I was trapped in this room. With it. And it was getting stronger again. It began to move. Not towards me. It dragged its heavy, armored form to the center of the room. It stood there, humming with a low, powerful thrum. The floor vibrated beneath my bare feet. The bits of wire and melted plastic that snaked through its body began to writhe and shift. The black, hardened flesh seemed to melt, not from heat, but from some internal command. It was reshaping itself. I watched, paralyzed by a new kind of horror. This was worse than the raw, chaotic violence from before. This was deliberate. This was intelligent. The amorphous bulk began to contract and extend. 2 sections of hardened shell split and elongated, forming crude, powerful legs. The main torso thickened, and 2 more limbs branched out from its sides, ending in clusters of twisted copper wire that looked like nightmare parodies of human fingers. It was forcing itself into a bipedal form. It was mimicking a man. It was mimicking me. A head-like mass rose from the top of its new shoulders. It was a featureless ball of fused-together electronics, the scorched remains of old TVs and radios I recognized from the refuse it had dragged into the walls. In the center of the mass, a single blue camera lens glowed to life. The lens from my own laptop, repurposed into a cold, unblinking eye. It stood there, a grotesque effigy of a human being, a 7-foot-tall horror of burnt plastic, tangled wires, and metal shards, all sculpted into a mockery of my own form. It was a thing of pure black hatred given a shape I knew. It turned its head, and the single blue eye fixed on me. The thrumming intensified. The air grew thick with ozone. The blue eye flared. A crackle of static erupted from its chest, where a speaker grill from an old stereo was embedded like a gaping mouth. A distorted, electronic hiss, and then it spoke. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a shriek, it was my voice. Not my voice now, screaming and raw. It was my voice from weeks ago, tired and annoyed, talking to my mom on the phone. A recording. Tinny, disembodied and utterly, horribly familiar. "I'm fine," it said in my own voice. "It's just easier this way." More static. Then another clip, this one from a drunken voicemail I'd left a friend. "Dude, I'm telling you, people are the worst." It took a step toward me. Click scrape. The sound of its heavy, armored foot on the floor. It raised one of its wire-fingered hands, not in a threat, but as if to gesture. The speaker in its chest crackled again. This time, the voice was a whisper, my own whisper, from a few nights ago, staring at the ceiling in the dark, thinking I was alone. The core of my being. The sad, simple truth of my life. The philosophy that had made me the perfect subject for this experiment. When something happens, the monster wearing my face said in my own resigned whisper, no one helps. The last thing I ever said in my own voice, the last true thought I had before the animal took over, was a whisper. No one helps. The monster wearing my face, built from my trash and my regrets, spoke it back to me. A final sentence. A period at the end of my life. The blue lens of my laptop, its single eye, flared. The speaker in its chest crackled with static, a clearing of its throat. I didn't wait for the next word. The sledgehammer dropped from my numb fingers, clattering on the glass-strewn floor. My brain had one thought. Not fight, not scream, not die. It was a single, insane command. Forward. I lunged, not at the thing, but past it. My feet slipped on broken plastic and shards of glass, but I didn't fall. The air I sucked in was still cold, still sharp with ozone. I aimed for the one place that made no sense, the one place it would never expect. I aimed for the hole. My hole. The one I had hammered into the wall in a fit of rage and fear. Its doorway into my world was about to become my doorway into its. The thing made a sound, a high-frequency screech of surprise, its stolen voice recordings cutting out. It took a heavy, shambling step to intercept me, its wire-fingered hand reaching. It was too slow. It was built for power, not for speed. I was built for panic. I dove headfirst through the jagged opening. There was a moment of scraping pain as drywall and splintered wood tore at my back and shoulders. Then I was through. I was inside. Darkness. Absolute and total. It wasn't the dark of a room with the lights off. This was a physical presence. It smelled of ancient dust, of damp rot, of hot copper and something else. Something like spoiled meat and battery acid. The air was thick, leaving a film on my tongue. I landed on my hands and knees on a surface I couldn't see. It was uneven, covered in loose, gritty debris and what felt like thick, cold cables under a layer of slime. Behind me, the gash of light from my apartment was blocked. A huge, dark shape filled the opening. The monster. It didn't try to speak anymore. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the structure around me, a sound that came from deep in its makeshift chest. The hunt was on. I scrambled forward, blind. My hands met pipes, cold and slick with condensation. Thick bundles of wiring, stiff and unyielding. The flimsy wooden lathe of the building's old bones. This wasn't just a space between walls. It was a nervous system. A network of pathways and tunnels. The building's secret anatomy. A low, scraping sound echoed from behind me. The sound of its armored feet dragging on concrete. It was in here with me. It was following. I forced myself to move faster, crab-walking sideways into a narrower passage. My shoulder scraped against rough brick. My bare feet slid on something wet. The sounds of the hive were louder in here, transmitted through the structure itself. A muffled crash from below. A thin, reedy wail from somewhere to my left. A heavy, rhythmic ramming from far above. I wasn't in a hiding place. I was in the main artery. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My heart was a fist hammering against the inside of my ribs. I had to keep moving. I shoved myself forward, my hands acting as my eyes. I felt everything. The rough texture of 100 years of dust. The sharp edge of a metal bracket. The soft, yielding surface of ancient insulation. Then something touched my ankle. It wasn't a bump. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, questing touch. Thin and wiry, like a bundle of guitar strings coated in cold grease. It wrapped once around my ankle and pulled. I yelled, a raw, choked sound, and kicked backward with all my strength. My heel connected with something that crunched, and the tendril released me. I didn't wait. I scrambled forward, terror giving me a strength I didn't know I had. I was a worm in a tomb, a rat in a snake pit. I was inside the enemy. The walls of the passage pressed in, forcing me onto my stomach. I was crawling now, pulling myself forward with my elbows and hands. The air was getting worse, thicker. I could feel them, all around me, not just the one behind me. I could feel the vibrations in the floorboards beneath my chest. The slight shift of a heavy weight in the ceiling, joists above my head. A faint, slick, sliding sound from the other side of the pipe to my right. Another tentacle, thicker this time, slithered across my back. It was heavy, and for a second, it pinned me. I felt the fused wires and nodules of burnt plastic scrape against my t-shirt. I bucked, writhing like an insect, and it slid off, continuing its slow exploration of the darkness. It hadn't been an attack. It was just mapping its territory. Checking for intruders. I was the intruder. The growl of my pursuer was closer now. I could hear the click and drag of its steps, maybe 10 feet behind me. It wasn't rushing. It knew these tunnels. It knew there was no exit. The chase was a formality. My flailing hand found nothing. An open space. I pushed my head and shoulders forward and looked down. It wasn't a drop. It was a slope. A wide metal chute, descending into a deeper blackness. An air duct. A massive one. Probably a central line for the whole building. It was wide enough for me to fit. Above me, directly above the opening of the chute, I heard it. A heavy, scraping sound on the other side of the ceiling. It was right there. It had cut me off. The one behind me was closing in. The one above me was waiting. A pincer movement. A planned hunt. This was the end of the line. No, there was one way out. Down. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I forgot the creatures. I forgot the men in white coats. I forgot everything except the raw command bellowed by the animal part of my brain. Go. I wriggled my body over the edge and let go. The fall was instant. My back slammed against the cold metal of the chute, and I started to slide, accelerating fast. It was a water slide from hell. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched roar of metal on bone and flesh. I tumbled, hitting the sides, my shoulder exploding in pain as it struck a rivet. I saw nothing. Just the feeling of falling, faster and faster, into a darkness that felt final. The chute ended. I flew out into open air for a single, heart-stopping second. Then I hit. The landing was soft and wet, and it smelled awful. A mountain of black plastic bags and rotting food broke my fall. I sank into it. The stench of decay filling my mouth and nose. Garbage. Mountains of it. I had landed in the building's basement, in the dumpsters. For a moment, I just lay there, buried in filth, every part of my body screaming in pain. My lungs burned. My shoulder was a knot of fire, but I was alive. And for the first time in hours, I was alone. There was no growling, no scraping, just the drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I pushed myself up, trash bag sliding off me. Dim light filtered in from a grime-caked window high on one wall. I could see the outlines of boilers, of old furniture draped in white sheets like corpses, of a row of padlocked storage cages. And I could see a door, a heavy steel service door with a push bar. I staggered towards it, my legs unsteady. Every step sent a jolt of pain through my body. I reached the door, my hands shaking. I leaned my full weight against the bar. With a groan of rusted metal, the lock clicked open. Cold night air hit my face. Real air, city air, tasting of exhaust fumes and freedom. I stumbled out into a narrow back alley. The brick walls of my building rose up on one side, a silent, dark monolith. It looked like any other apartment building, a tomb disguised as a home. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran like I had never run before. My bare feet slapped against the dirty pavement, ignoring the sharp sting of gravel and grit. I burst out of the alley onto a deserted street. Not my street, a different one. The streetlights here were working, casting long, lonely pools of orange light on the empty sidewalk. I ran past darkened storefronts, past parked cars. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. Away. The sounds of the city started to return, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic from a larger avenue blocks away. They were the most beautiful sounds I had ever heard. Finally, my lungs gave out. I collapsed against the glass wall of a bus shelter, sliding down to sit on the cold bench. I dragged in air, my chest heaving. My body was a map of pain. I was covered in filth, blood, and sweat. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from the aftershock. I did it. I got out. I looked up, my eyes trying to focus. Across the street, a huge electronic billboard was mounted on the side of a building. It was cycling through ads. A soft drink. A new car. A cell phone plan. Normal things. The sight of them was an anchor, a confirmation that the real world still existed. I closed my eyes, just for a second, letting my head rest against the cold glass behind me. A sudden, sharp buzz of static made me flinch. My eyes snapped open. The billboard across the street had changed. The car ad was gone. The screen was filled with flickering black and white static, like an old TV with no signal. The buzzing sound intensified, sharp and unpleasant. Then the static cleared. The screen went black for a single beat. And then 2 words appeared. Not in an ad font. In a clean, simple, blocky typeface. White letters on a black background. They filled the entire screen, a message for an audience of one. Phase 2 begins.